Yo! Welcome to Harryverse X. Got an absolute banger for you today. Susanoo and Amaterasu found Harry at age 4 in cupboard and divine siblings made him god of storm and sun. Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1. The night two gods came to Privet Drive. The storm had no business being in Surrey. That was the thing about it, Surrey didn't get storms like this. Surrey got drizzle, got grey skies, got the kind of lukewarm English rain that seemed personally offended by any suggestion of drama. But tonight the sky above Privet Drive was doing something else entirely. It had split itself open with purple-edged lightning that cracked sideways across the clouds, and the thunder that followed wasn't the rolling kind. It was sharp. Decisive. Like something enormous had made up its mind. Number 4 sat squat and identical to every other house on the street, its garden gnome knocked sideways by the wind, its hanging basket spinning in wild circles. The Dursleys were asleep. Vernon's snores competed poorly with the storm. Petunia had pulled the duvet up over her ears somewhere around midnight. Dudley slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a child who had never once been told no. Nobody was awake to see the light. It came from the end of the street first, not lightning, not exactly. Lightning was white or blue-white or sometimes the yellow-purple of serious weather. This was warm. Almost gold. It moved with intention, unhurried, like sunlight deciding to take a walk at 2 in the morning, which was not something sunlight had any business doing in October in England. It pooled at the corner of the street and gathered itself, and then it walked. She was tall, though tall didn't quite cover it. She was the kind of presence that made tall seem like an understatement, not because of her physical height, which was considerable, but because the air around her simply rearranged itself to accommodate her. She wore a white kimono that the rain should have been soaking through but wasn't, because the rain wasn't falling anywhere near her. The water curved away, as if even the storm understood the hierarchy. Her hair was black and so long it pooled behind her, and her eyes, when she turned to look at the street, were the color of noon in August, brilliant and warm and absolutely merciless in the way that only pure light can be. Amaterasu stood at the corner of Privet Drive and felt the wrongness before she saw it. It wasn't a magical wrongness in the wizarding sense, no dark spells, no cursed objects, no blood wards crackling with hostile intent, though those were there too, layered into the foundations of number 4 like mortar. This was a different kind of wrong. The kind that didn't need magic to identify. The kind that lived in the space between a child's cry and an adult's deliberate silence. She turned toward number 4, and that was when the sky tore open directly above it. Susanoo arrived the way he always arrived, without any particular regard for subtlety. The lightning strike that announced him hit the oak tree at the end of the Dursleys' garden and split it down the middle with a crack that should have woken the entire street, and would have, except that the rain was suddenly very loud and people in Surrey had a remarkable talent for sleeping through things they didn't want to investigate. He stepped out of the aftermath of the strike the way someone might step off a train, casual, expectant, already looking around. He was massive in the way that mountains are massive, broad-shouldered and wearing the colors of the storm itself, grey and silver and the deep navy of serious weather. His hair was the white blue of lightning and his expression, as always, was somewhere between joy and something that would become joy in about 30 seconds. "You felt it too," he said. Not a question. He was already looking at the house. "From the moment I entered the country," Amaterasu said. "I felt it from the coast." He paused. "What is that ward structure?" She had already examined it. "Blood protection. Old magic, clever construction. Someone very powerful anchored it to the house using his mother's sacrifice. A beat. They used it as a cage." Susanoo's expression did something then that it rarely did. It went very still. They stood on the pavement in front of number 4, Privet Drive, in a storm that was technically not happening according to the Met Office's forecast for Surrey, and they looked at the house. A light was on in the ground floor, the living room, or the corridor, something small and ambient, not a lamp left on for a child afraid of the dark but the standby light of the television, red and disinterested. "How old?" Susanoo asked. 4, Amaterasu said. Perhaps just turned. He moved toward the house and she caught his arm, not to stop him, but to keep him from removing the front door from its hinges before they'd had a chance to understand what they were walking into, which was the sort of thing he occasionally did when his emotions got ahead of his judgment. Carefully, she said. I am being careful. You are thinking about being careful. That's different. He exhaled through his nose, a sound that, in the right atmospheric conditions, would have produced a small squall somewhere over the North Sea. Then he nodded, once, and they approached the door together. It was unlocked. Not the locks, there were 3 of those, sturdy and new, the kind someone installs when they're serious about keeping something in rather than keeping things out. But Amaterasu pressed 2 fingers flat against the door and the locks understood that they were in the presence of something that preceded locks by a considerable amount of time, and they opened. The hallway smelled like carpet cleaner and something underneath that, boiled vegetables, damp wool, and below that, something else. Something that tightened both divine faces simultaneously. The smell of space withheld. Of a small body in a smaller space. The cupboard under the stairs had a latch on the outside. That was the thing Susanoo noticed first, because it was the kind of detail that announced everything. A latch. On the outside. A latch meant to keep something in. He crossed the distance between the front door and the cupboard in 3 steps, and Amaterasu was already crouching before he got there, her ear close to the thin wood, listening. Breathing. Small. Shallow. Slightly congested in the way that children get when they've been crying for a long time and then fallen asleep because crying becomes exhausting. Susanoo's hand closed around the latch. Gently, Amaterasu murmured. He opened it gently. The inside of the cupboard was barely large enough to turn around in. There was a cot that had once been a proper cot and was now held together with what looked like determination and structural stubbornness. A single blanket, too thin for October. A pillow with a case that had been washed so many times it had achieved a kind of philosophical grayness, it had moved past color into a state of post-color. There were crayon drawings on the inner wall, child-made, the kind where the sun is always in the corner and people are stick figures with enormous heads. One of the stick figures was alone in what looked like a box. Harry Potter was curled against the back wall of the cupboard, knees pulled to his chest, one hand tucked under his chin. He was small, more than small, he was slight in a way that went beyond the natural slightness of a 4-year-old and crossed into something purposeful and systematic. His face was thin. His wrists were thin. The blanket had slipped off one shoulder and he hadn't woken to pull it back. His hair was a catastrophe, black and wild in every direction. There was a scar on his forehead in the shape of lightning and, because Susanoo was who he was, the sight of it hit him somewhere he didn't entirely have words for. There was a spider in the corner of the cupboard, and it had built a web between a broken toy soldier and the wall, and that was the only other living thing in that small dark space with Harry Potter on a stormy October night, and somehow that detail was the one that undid Amaterasu. She didn't weep the way humans weep. What happened was that the light around her intensified briefly, sharply, like a flame catching a draft, and then steadied itself. Her jaw set. Her eyes did the thing they did when she had made a decision from which there was absolutely no returning. Susanoo said nothing. He crouched down until he was level with the opening of the cupboard, and he looked at Harry for a long time. The wind outside had dropped to almost nothing, the storm holding its breath. The boy stirred. Children have instincts that adults lose somewhere along the way, that animal awareness of being watched, and even in sleep, even malnourished and exhausted and sleeping in a cupboard in October, Harry's eyes opened. They were green. Brilliantly, impossibly green, the kind of green that seemed to have been borrowed from somewhere else and installed in a small human face as an oversight. He looked at Susanoo without fear in the way that very young children sometimes look at enormous or strange things, not because they don't register that the thing is enormous or strange, but because they haven't yet learned that enormous and strange things are supposed to be frightening. "Hello," Harry said. His voice was small and sleep-roughened. "Hello," said Susanoo, and his voice, which was usually the voice of storms, came out remarkably soft. Harry looked past him to Amaterasu, and the light she was quietly emitting, she was always emitting some light, it was simply the nature of what she was, made him blink once, slowly, like a cat deciding whether to trust something warm. "You're bright," Harry said. "I've been told," said Amaterasu. "Are you a dream?" "No." Harry considered this with the gravity of someone for whom this question had real weight. He looked around the cupboard, at the spider, at the blanket that had slipped, at the locked space he lived in, and then he looked back at these two inexplicable presences crouched outside his small door, and he said, with the complete pragmatism of a 4-year-old, "The big people won't like you being here." "The big people," Susanoo said, "are asleep." Vernon shouts. "He can try," said Amaterasu, and something about the way she said it made Harry study her face, and apparently what he found there satisfied something in him because he sat up straighter and pushed his hair out of his eyes and looked at them with something that was not quite hope but was in the same neighborhood. "Are you here for me?" The simplicity of the question. The absolute plainness of it. The fact that a 4-year-old child had asked it without decoration, without build-up, without any of the self-protective hedging that humans generally apply to wanting things, just "Are you here for me, because if you're not, I need to know immediately so I can stop looking at you with this expression." Susanoo looked at Amaterasu. Amaterasu looked at Susanoo. What passed between them wasn't words, it was older than words, the kind of communication that existed before language had been invented to make things complicated. "Yes," Susanoo said. Harry nodded, once, as if something had been confirmed rather than decided. Then he reached for the blanket and held it like he was considering whether to bring it, and then he put it down, because it was a bad blanket and some part of him seemed to already understand that wherever he was going, the blankets would be better. He climbed out of the cupboard on his own, which was important to him, that was clear. He stood in the corridor in overlarge pajamas with faded cartoon dinosaurs on them and he looked up at Susanoo, who was both taller and broader than any human Harry had encountered in his 4 years, and he showed absolutely no sign of finding this concerning. "What are you?" Harry asked. Susanoo crouched down to his level again, and up close, the things that marked him as not human were visible in the particular way that divine things are visible to children, the electric quality of the air around him, the way his eyes held lightning the way a storm cloud does, not showing it but holding it, the almost sound of wind somewhere that wasn't anywhere near them. "Have you heard the word God before?" Susanoo asked. Harry thought about it. "From the television. Vernon says it when he stubs his toe." Amaterasu made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That's a different usage," Susanoo said. "What I mean is, something very old. Very powerful. Something that was here before the streets and the houses and all the rules people built." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "Like the storm?" Susanoo's expression did something extraordinary, it cracked open with delight, sudden and genuine and warm as anything. "Exactly like the storm." "And her?" Harry looked at Amaterasu. "Like the sun?" "Yes," she said. He processed this with the focused seriousness of a very small academic. "The sun and the storm came to my cupboard," he said, as if taking notes. "We did." "Why?" It was Amaterasu who answered this. She crouched down too, so that they were both at his level, this small corridor, two ancient deities folded up in the hallway of a Surrey semi-detached at 2 in the morning, and she said, "Because you are ours, and we are yours, and the people who put you in that cupboard had no right to you. Not your power, not your name, and not your time." Something happened in Harry's face. It was subtle, a small boy has limited tools for expressing the seismic, but his chin came up slightly and his shoulders did something imperceptible and his eyes went from cautiously hopeful to something else, something that would require years and experience and a great deal of storms and sunlight to fully develop, but the seed of it was there in that moment, in the corridor, in the middle of the night. "Will we go tonight?" he asked. "Right now," Susanoo said. "Can I get my drawings?" He gestured toward the cupboard. "The crayon ones on the wall." Amaterasu looked at the wall of the cupboard, at the stick figures and the sun in the corner and the small person in the box, and her expression went very calm and very decided, and she said, "We'll make you better ones. With real paper." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. And he put his hand in hers. The warmth that ran through him when he did, a golden current, something fundamental, something that moved in the blood and in the bones and in whatever part of a person exists beneath both, was something Harry would not have words for until he was much older. What he felt in the moment was simply that her hand was warm in the specific way that the sun on your back is warm on a cold morning, not just heat but presence, the physical fact of something large and ancient and indisputably there. Susanoo opened the front door. Vernon Dursley appeared at the top of the stairs. He had heard the door. He was the kind of man who installed 3 locks and checked them every night at 9:15, and some part of his sleeping mind had registered the intrusion and sent him lurching down the hallway in his dressing gown with the automatic authority of a man who had never once in his life had cause to doubt his own authority. He was halfway down the stairs when he saw them. The light that Amaterasu was producing, the involuntary, ambient light of what she was, lit the corridor from below like a sunrise happening in a hallway. Susanoo stood in the open door with the October storm at his back, and the wind was moving his hair in the particular way that wind moves through storms rather than through spaces, and his eyes were doing the thing with the lightning. And Harry was standing between them, hand in hand with the goddess of the sun, in his cartoon dinosaur pajamas. Vernon's face went through several colors. It started red, moved through a kind of hectic purple, and arrived at a grayish white. His mouth opened. "What?" he started. "No," said Amaterasu. She said it simply. Not loudly. Not with any particular heat. The way you'd say no to a question that didn't deserve the full engagement of a conversation, a simple, clean refusal, directed less at Vernon specifically and more at whatever he had been about to say, which was going to be some version of "how dare you" and "this is my house" and "what is going on," all of which she had assessed, found irrelevant, and declined simultaneously. Vernon stared at her. He stared at Harry. He stared at Susanoo, who was looking at him with the kind of expression that doesn't contain anger precisely but does contain the clear capacity for it, and Vernon Dursley, who was not a brave man beneath the bluster, felt something cold settle in his chest. Not the cold of magic, not the cold of the storm, but the cold of a living creature recognizing, at some animal level, that it is in the presence of something that is not operating by the rules it knows. "The boy," Vernon tried again. "Is leaving," Susanoo said. His voice had dropped into the register it used when he meant absolutely every word. "With us. Tonight. You can't just, you can't come into my house." "I did," Susanoo said. "And take a child, we are," Amaterasu said. "The police, I'll call." "You can't," Susanoo tilted his head very slightly. The storm outside chose this precise moment to produce the loudest crack of thunder it had managed all evening, a sound that hit the chest rather than the ears, the kind that reminded large mammals that weather is old and large and fundamentally uninterested in property law. The lights in the house flickered. Vernon shut up. Harry, who had been watching this entire exchange with the attentiveness of someone who had learned to read situations for survival, looked up at Susanoo and said, quietly but clearly, "He shouts a lot but he doesn't do very much." Susanoo looked down at him. "I noticed. He locked the cupboard from outside." "I noticed that too." Vernon had gone the color of old cheese. Amaterasu looked at him then, really looked at him, the full weight of a divine gaze that didn't need to be enhanced or amplified because the raw fact of it was sufficient, and she said, very calmly, "If we ever have reason to return here, it will not be a social call." Then she walked through the front door with Harry's hand in hers, and Susanoo stepped aside to let them pass and then followed without looking back at Vernon, because Vernon Dursley was not a thing that warranted a second look. They walked down the path of number 4 Privet Drive, and the gate opened for them without being touched, and the storm, which had been waiting, reconsidered its approach and dropped to a low, satisfied rumble. Harry looked up at the sky. Purple-edged lightning, moving in the clouds. "That's you," he said to Susanoo. "Mostly," Susanoo said. Sometimes it just happens. Do you make it happen on purpose? When I want to. Harry looked at him sideways. Can I learn? And Susanoo, god of the storm, master of seas and tempests, the great divine force that had been present at the birth of the Japanese islands, who had slain the Yamata no Orochi and wept oceans for his mother Izanami, smiled at a 4-year-old boy in dinosaur pajamas on a Surrey pavement at 2 a.m, and said, with absolute conviction, you can learn anything. They did not take a car or a train or any of the ordinary mechanisms of human transit. They walked to the end of Privet Drive, which was where the streetlight stopped and the darkness started, the proper country darkness that existed in the gap between the suburb and the motorway, and Amaterasu reached out her free hand and did something with the light, gathered it, rearranged it, folded the night back like a page in a book, and the space between one step and the next became somewhere else entirely. Harry felt it as a warmth and then a sensation like being the inside of a bell that had just been rung, not unpleasant, actually fascinating, the kind of physical experience that made his whole body feel very awake and very present. He looked down at his feet, which were on grass now, real grass, cool and slightly damp, and he looked up and the sky was different. Not English sky. Something older. The stars were arranged differently, or seemed to be, clearer, more present, the Milky Way visible as a genuine river of light rather than a vague suggestion. They were in a clearing on the edge of a forest that smelled of pine and something underneath the pine that was stone, the particular cold mineral smell of very old rock. Somewhere nearby, water was moving. Where is this? Harry asked. Japan, Amaterasu said. I see. The word meant nothing to him yet. In a year it would mean home. In 10 years it would mean the place in his chest where he stored everything essential. Are we going to live here? Sometimes here, she said. Sometimes other places. We move. Is that okay? She looked down at him. We'll always come back. Harry absorbed this. He was starting to yawn. It was the middle of the night and he was 4 and the surge of extraordinary experience was beginning to run up against the basic physics of a small body that needed sleep. He was fighting the yawn with the focused determination of a child who didn't want to miss anything. You're exhausted, Susanoo said. I'm not, Harry said, yawning visibly. Humans need sleep. I know, Harry said, indignant. Including small humans. I'm not that small. Susanoo regarded him. You are, actually, fairly small. You're just very big. That is also true, Susanoo agreed. There was a structure at the edge of the clearing, not quite a house in the English sense, a series of low wooden buildings with curved roofs, the eaves sweeping upward in the old style, paper screens warm with interior light. It was utterly different from number 4 Privet Drive in every possible way, which was, Amaterasu had considered carefully, precisely the point. Not just a better place. A different world. She brought him inside, through a corridor that smelled of cedar and something warm and food adjacent that Harry's stomach responded to immediately and with enthusiasm. There was a room with a low bed, an actual bed, with actual blankets, the thick quilted kind, and a pillow that was a proper pillow and not a philosophical statement about color. Harry stood in the middle of the room and looked at the bed and then looked at her. This is mine, he said. Yes. He walked to it and pressed one hand flat on the blankets, testing. Then he looked up at her with those green eyes and said, very quietly, in the voice he reserved for things that were important, do I have to go back? Amaterasu crouched down in front of him, and the light from her was steady and warm and present, and she put both hands on his shoulders and she said, no. Never. Harry pressed his mouth together, and his chin was doing something that required considerable effort to control, and he nodded, once, very firmly, the way people nod when they are agreeing not to cry about something. Okay, he said. She helped him into the bed and pulled the blankets up and he was asleep before she reached the door, deeply and immediately, the way exhausted children sleep when they have finally found somewhere that feels safe enough to let go. Susanoo was waiting in the main room when she came out, sitting on the floor. He tended to sit on the floor. He found furniture unnecessarily constraining, with a cup of something hot in both hands, which he'd made himself because he was, beneath all the storm and divinity, someone who found the process of making a hot drink centering in difficult moments. He looked up at her and his expression asked the question. "Sleeping," she said. She sat across from him. The storm, which had followed them at a respectful distance across half the globe, was rumbling somewhere over the Pacific, keeping its distance. "The blood ward," she said. "I know. Someone constructed it deliberately. Someone used his mother's death as mortar." She said it carefully, each word placed exactly. "That means someone knew about the mother. Someone directed him there." "A wizard," Susanoo said. "A powerful one. Old magic, old construction. Intentional." She looked at the wall that separated them from the room where Harry was sleeping. They knew what was done to his parents. They knew what he was. They put him there anyway. Susanoo's hands tightened slightly on the cup. "The war he was apparently central to, according to the residue," she said, "ended when he survived whatever killed his parents. He destroyed something that night. Something that should not have existed. And they put him in a cupboard," Susanoo said. "And locked it from the outside." The storm outside moved closer without either of them consciously directing it. The pine trees at the edge of the clearing bowed. "There's a world," she said. "Humans. Magic. Old traditions, old institutions. They know his name. They expect things from him." She paused. "They've built something around the image of who he should be. Something useful to them." "He'll disappoint them," Susanoo said, with evident satisfaction. "He'll need to understand it all. Eventually. Soon enough," she said. "He has perhaps a decade before the world he was born into comes looking." Susanoo looked at the cup in his hands. "A decade is enough," he said. "A decade is more than enough. I had 3 seconds with a sword and the Orochi was finished. He is not going to be trained to kill dragons." "No," he agreed. "Better things than that. He needs to know how to be human, Susanoo. He's not just ours. He was human before he was ours. He needs both." "I know." He said it without defensiveness, which was how she knew he understood it properly. "I know." She looked at him. "You wept when you saw him." "I didn't weep," Susanoo said. "Your eyes did something. The storm was affecting them. We were indoors. There was ambient moisture." "Susanoo." He set down the cup and looked at her with the expression he used when he was done pretending something wasn't true. "He looked like the crayon drawings," he said. "The one in the box. He drew himself in a box." Amaterasu said nothing. "He drew himself in the box," Susanoo said again, "and then the sun in the corner. The way they all do. The way every child does, they put the sun in the corner. And he was in the box. And the sun was up there in the corner. Not near him. Just in the corner. The way it always is." Amaterasu was quiet for a long moment. "Not anymore," she said. He nodded. "No," he said. "Not anymore." They sat in the cedar-smelling room while the storm walked circles around the Ise Peninsula and the stars were clear and the boy they had found in a cupboard slept the first genuinely safe sleep of his entire life. In the morning there would be decisions to make, structures to build, a child to feed properly and teach carefully. There would be, somewhere on an island 7,000 miles away, a house with a large man standing pale at the top of his stairs and 3 locks on a cupboard door that had been opened from outside, and he would spend the rest of his life not telling anyone exactly what he had seen, because there was no version of that story that made him look like a man who had done the right things. But that was morning. That was tomorrow. That was the world. Tonight, 2 ancient deities sat with hot drinks and the particular quiet of an enormous decision already made, and outside the storm sang itself to sleep over the Pacific, and in a room with proper blankets, Harry Potter, who was not yet a god and not yet a legend and not yet anything the wizarding world was going to have to rapidly revise its expectations about, slept without dreaming for the first time in his life. Or if he dreamed of lightning in the corner and the sun right next to him, right there, right where it was needed. Which was, in the end, what he'd drawn himself in the box. Just the sun, not quite close enough. Never again. Chapter 2, A Decade of Thunder and Light. The first thing Harry learned was how to fall. Not metaphorically. Literally. Susanoo took him to the edge of a cliff on the second week, a proper cliff, stone-faced and wind-whipped, above the grey-green churning of the Pacific, and he crouched down and said, very matter-of-factly, "Jump." Harry looked down. The water was very far below. He was 4 years old and wearing a coat Amaterasu had found for him in a market in Kyoto that was red with gold toggles and was, in Harry's considered opinion, the finest garment he had ever owned, which was not a high bar given that everything he'd previously owned had been Dudley's leftovers, but still. "What happens if I land wrong?" Harry asked. "You'll hurt," Susanoo said. Harry looked at him. "You won't catch me." "I will absolutely catch you," Susanoo said. "But not before you've had long enough to understand what falling feels like. Because falling is information. And you need to stop being afraid of it before you can do anything useful with it." Harry looked down again. The wind was coming up off the water and pushing his hair back and the coat's toggles were clicking against each other. "What if I don't want to jump?" he asked. "Then we go home and have breakfast and we try again tomorrow," Susanoo said, with complete sincerity. Harry thought about this for a moment. Then he jumped. The fall was exactly as advertised, long, and fast, and the wind tore at the coat and the water came up to meet him with the casual indifference of something that has been doing this for a long time, and then two enormous hands caught him 6 feet from the surface and held him there, suspended, while the sea spray hit his face and his heart hammered against his ribs and everything in his body was simultaneously furious and electrified. "Information," Susanoo said, from above and beside him in the way that storm gods can be when they feel like it. "It's fast," Harry said, breathless. "Everything real is fast." Harry looked at the water churning below him, close enough to touch. "Can we do it again?" They did it 7 more times that day. By the 5th time, Harry had stopped squeezing his eyes shut. By the 7th, he was looking down the whole way. That was the first lesson. The second lesson came 3 weeks later and had nothing to do with cliffs. Amaterasu sat with him at a low table in the cedar house with paper and ink and a brush and taught him to write. Not English, though English came too, along with Japanese and a handful of other languages that she considered basic literacy, but something older. The characters the kami used, the script of the divine realm, which was not so much a writing system as it was a way of encoding meaning into symbol in the particular way that old things hold meaning, dense and layered and humming slightly when you read them correctly. Harry was not a patient child. He was 4, and then 5, and patience is a skill that requires construction, it doesn't arrive pre-installed. He smudged the ink and got it on the coat and occasionally put the brush down and said he was done, which he wasn't, and Amaterasu would look at him with those noon in August eyes and say, "One more," and he would pick the brush back up because there was something about her attention that made him want to be worthy of it. Not in the desperate way he'd wanted to be worthy of the Dursleys' attention, wanting anything from the Dursleys had been about survival, not love, and even at 4, some part of him had understood the difference. This was different. Amaterasu's attention was freely given, consistently present, and entirely without condition, which meant that earning it meant something real. He learned to write. He learned to read. He devoured books with a hunger that Amaterasu found both gratifying and occasionally alarming. She'd find him at 3 in the morning in the main room, cross-legged on the floor, one of her divine texts open in his lap, squinting at the characters by the light of the paper screens. She stopped sending him back to bed after the 4th time. She brought him tea instead. "What is this one about?" Harry asked, the first time she appeared in the doorway with the tea. She looked at the text. "The formation of the islands. How the world was made. Were you there?" I was one of the reasons it happened, she said. He looked at her over the top of the page with an expression of pure academic intensity. Can you tell me the parts that are wrong in the book? She sat down on the floor next to him, and they talked until sunrise, which was, she told him once, the best possible way to meet a morning. He never forgot that. The power came the way it always does with divine things, not in a single dramatic moment but gradually, the way the tide comes, advancing and retreating, each time reaching a little further. Harry felt it first as a physical thing, a buzzing in his palms when storms came over the peninsula, a warmth that moved up his arms when he stood in direct sunlight. He didn't mention it for 2 months, because he was observant enough to understand that this was connected to Susanoo and Amaterasu, and he wanted to understand what he was experiencing before he said anything about it, because he had learned early that making a wrong claim was more embarrassing than asking a question. He finally mentioned it in the spring of his first year with them, during a thunderstorm that rolled in off the sea with the particular focused energy of a storm that had been building for days. He and Susanoo were on the cliff, they went there often, watching it come in, and the buzzing in Harry's palms had become a vibration, working up through his wrists and into his forearms. It's doing it again, Harry said, holding his hands up and looking at them. Susanoo glanced at his palms. What does it feel like? Like before a sneeze, Harry said. But in my arms. Both? Both. Susanoo nodded, slowly. Put your hands out toward the water. Harry put his hands out. The wind hit them and the vibration moved from his forearms into his hands and from his hands into the air, and the air in front of his fingers crackled, actually crackled, a sound and a sensation and a smell all at once, the ozone smell of lightning, and between his right index finger and the sky above the water, a single small thread of electrical current arced and disappeared. Harry stared at his hand. Again, Susanoo said, and his voice had gone very quiet in the way it went when he was moved by something. Harry put his hand out and reached for the feeling and the thread came back, steadier this time, lasting a full second. It was white-blue and thin and it lit the immediate air around his fingers and it was, Harry felt with complete certainty, the most extraordinary thing he had ever done. Is this okay? Harry asked, which was not the question Susanoo had expected. Is it okay? Am I supposed to be able to do this? Susanoo looked at him for a long moment. You're supposed to do exactly what you're capable of, he said. And what you're capable of is going to be considerable. Why? Because of you and Amaterasu? Partly. He paused, picking the words carefully. Your blood was always extraordinary. Whatever happened to you when you were small made it more so. And then you came to us. He looked at Harry's hand, where another small thread of current was playing between his fingers. We've been flowing through you for a year. Power like ours doesn't live with someone without leaving marks. Like a stain? Harry asked. Like a gift, Susanoo said. Harry looked at the thread of lightning between his fingers and the incoming storm over the water and then he looked at Susanoo with an expression that was so openly delighted that Susanoo, god of storms, 800,000 years old by any reasonable accounting, felt something in his chest do something it had not done in a considerable number of centuries. Can we practice? Harry asked. We can practice right now, Susanoo said. They practiced right then. The storm reached the coast and Susanoo was in it and of it and conducting it the way he always did, not consciously but as a matter of being, and Harry stood on the cliff with his arms out and reached for the current and it came to him. Not a thread now. A real arc. White blue and branching, the real shape of lightning, hitting the stone of the cliff 10 feet to his left with a crack that would have been alarming to anyone who hadn't chosen to stand on a cliff in a storm on purpose. Harry laughed. He threw his head back and laughed, and the storm responded to it, the wind picking up around him, and Susanoo laughed too from somewhere inside the thunder, big and rolling and absolutely delighted. Amaterasu watched this from a safe distance and made a mental note to teach Harry about precision next, before he took out a forest. The sunfire came later, he was 6 by then, and it came through Amaterasu's teaching rather than accident. She sat with him on the beach at low tide, on a morning that was clear and cold, the winter sun low and pale and doing its best, and she said, "You feel the warmth from me." "Always," Harry said. "That warmth is in you now. Not just on your skin. Inside." She pressed 2 fingers to his chest, lightly. "Here." He was quiet, feeling for it. It was different from the lightning feeling, less like a sneeze, more like someone had left a candle burning in his ribcage, steady and present and very patient. "I feel it," he said. "Bring it forward." He tried. Nothing happened. He tried again. Nothing happened. He sat in the cold sand and frowned with the concentrated fury of someone who had recently worked out how to call lightning and found this comparatively difficult. "Why doesn't it come?" he asked. "The storm comes from outside you," she said. "You reach out for it. The sun is inside you. You have to bring it forward instead of reaching out. It's a push, not a pull." He thought about this. Then he pushed. The light that came off his hands was golden and warm and genuine, not a fire, not exactly, but the quality of direct sunlight condensed into something small and holdable, sitting in his palm like a caught star. It was steady and warm and it lit his face from below, and Amaterasu looked at him holding it, and she was quiet in a way she wasn't always quiet, a stillness that came from somewhere deep. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "No," Harry said. "It feels like," he searched for the word. "Like being outside when it's cold and standing in a patch of sun." "Yes," she said. "That's right." "It's mine," he said, not possessively but with wonder, the statement of someone confirming the reality of something that should be impossible. "It's yours," she confirmed. He looked at the light in his palm for a long time. Then he closed his fingers around it gently, and when he opened them again it was still there, undiminished. "What can I do with it?" She looked at him steadily. "Many things. We'll learn them all." They learned them all. The years settled into a rhythm that was unlike any ordinary childhood, and also, in the ways that mattered, exactly like one. There were mornings that were purely lessons, divine script, human history, the way power worked at a fundamental level, the theology of the kami world, the mechanics of storm and sunlight. There were afternoons on cliffs and beaches, and once, memorably, inside a small contained typhoon that Susanoo had called up purely for practice purposes and which had gotten slightly out of hand and taken out 3 fishing boats worth of nets, which he'd replaced with an apologetic squall and a great deal of charm. There were evenings that were just evenings, the 3 of them in the cedar house, Harry doing whatever reading he'd chosen, Amaterasu writing, Susanoo doing something with a sword that he claimed was maintenance and was actually showing off, because Harry watched him every single time and Susanoo knew it. There was food, which mattered enormously to Harry in a way that required no explanation and received none. Amaterasu cooked things she'd learned across centuries, and Susanoo had strong and bizarre opinions about seasoning, and Harry ate everything with the focused appreciation of someone who had not always had enough and intended to never take it for granted. There were winters in the mountains. Susanoo had a place, several places, but this one in particular, in the Japanese Alps, where the snow came in hard and serious and the peaks were above the cloud layer on clear days, white and sharp against the blue, and the silence was the total specific silence of high altitude. He taught Harry to climb. He taught Harry to navigate by storm patterns and star positions and the way animals moved before weather changed. Harry was small for his age and then average for his age and then, around 10, suddenly not small at all, growing with the aggressive enthusiasm of someone whose body had stored up the task and was now executing it with interest. Harry was also, Amaterasu noted, with something between amusement and pride, developing a personality that was distinctly his own and nobody else's. He was warm, genuinely, openly warm, the kind of person who noticed when someone was uncomfortable and did something about it without making a production of it. He was funny in the dry, specific way that comes from having read a great deal and paid attention to people, and his sense of humor had been refined considerably by living with Susanoo, who was the kind of entity that found vast amusement in ordinary human situations and had no filter about expressing this. He was direct without being unkind. He argued with both of them regularly and without apology, which they had both encouraged, because gods who raise humans without teaching them to disagree with gods produce something very unpleasant, and they had both seen the results of that historically. He was also, and this was the part of him that moved most directly from what he had been into what he was becoming, utterly without the specific kind of fear that the Dursleys had spent 4 years installing. Not fearless in the stupid sense, Harry was not reckless, he understood consequences, he calculated risk with a precision that Amaterasu had deliberately taught. But the particular social fear, the weight of being unwanted, the hunching down to take up less space quality that the cupboard had been designed to produce, that was gone. Replaced by something open and upright and completely uninterested in making itself smaller. Susanoo had done some of that. His particular approach to teaching was not gentle, not cruel, but not soft either. He had a talent for placing Harry in situations that were just beyond what Harry thought he could manage and then being absolutely present while Harry managed them. He didn't rescue. He didn't over-explain. He stood in a storm and said reach for it and meant it. Amaterasu had done the rest. She had a gift for paying attention in a way that made the person being paid attention to feel visible in the best sense, not examined, not judged, but genuinely seen. She knew when Harry was struggling before he said so, and she did not let him struggle alone, but she also did not do the struggling for him, which is the harder thing to accomplish and the more important one. By 8, Harry could hold a storm front over a quarter-mile radius without Susanoo's direct assistance. By 9, the sunfire in his hands had developed enough control that he could use it with precision, a point of light, a broad wash of warmth, a focused beam that could cut stone. The combination of the two, storm and sun, lightning and fire, was, as Susanoo put it one afternoon while watching Harry practice on the mountain above ISE, something genuinely novel. Even among the kami, he said to Amaterasu, who was standing next to him watching Harry reshape a thunderhead through pure force of will on the mountain below. The dual nature is unusual. He's unusual, she said. He's going to be extraordinary, Susanoo said. He already is. Below them, Harry brought the thunderhead down to 50 feet above the ground and held it there, walking around it slowly, examining it from all sides with the critical eye of someone checking their own work for errors. He found something he didn't like on the eastern edge and corrected it, and the cloud reformed cleanly. Then he looked up at them. The wind shear is off on this one, he called up. The rotation is too far right. Fix it, Susanoo called back. I did fix it, Harry said. I'm telling you because the atmospheric condition here is wrong, the air's too warm for this altitude. Susanoo looked at Amaterasu. She looked back at him with an expression that said I told you without any words. There was also, running through the decade like a river runs through landscape, the matter of Harry's other heritage. The wizarding world. His mother's sacrifice. The name that he carried without knowing the full weight of it. They didn't hide it from him. That had never been an option. Harry was too perceptive and too direct and too committed to knowing the truth of things for omission to survive long. Amaterasu told him about his parents when he was 6. She sat with him in the evening with the paper screens warm behind her and she told him about Lily and James, what she had pieced together from the residue of magic still embedded in his scar, from the ward structure at Privet Drive, from the whispering of old magic that she could read the way other people read text. Harry listened with the total attention he brought to important things, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. He killed them, Harry said when she finished. This Voldemort. Yes. And then couldn't kill me. Whatever your mother did, she said, it was powerful enough to break his curse. It broke him instead. You survived. He ran. Harry was quiet for a moment. He's not dead, though, he said. It wasn't a question, it was the reasoning of someone who had been paying attention to how she'd phrased things. No, Amaterasu said. Probably not. He'll come back. Almost certainly. He absorbed this. And the wizarding world. They think I'm, what? Their savior? They think you're the boy who lived, she said. The child who survived the unforgivable. They've built a great deal of story around that. But they don't know where I am. No one does, she said. Whoever placed you with the Dursleys will know you've gone. But finding you, she glanced toward the window, toward the Pacific darkness and the divine shore of Ise, is not something ordinary wizards can do. Harry looked at the window too. When I'm 11, he said, I'll get a letter. She blinked, slightly surprised by the precision. How did you know that? I've been reading your texts, he said. The ones about the British magical tradition. There's a school. Hogwarts. They send a letter at 11. He looked at her. That's going to be how they find me. Amaterasu looked at him. This was the thing about Harry, he didn't need to be told things were coming. He watched, and read, and assembled, and then stated his conclusions with a directness that was entirely his own. Yes, she said. Probably. I want to go, he said. She'd expected this. Why? Because it's where I'm from, he said. Not Privet Drive. Not the Dursleys. The magic. He looked at his hands, the faint warmth of the sun fire, always there now, the baseline. The magic I was born with is different from what you've given me. I want to understand all of it. Not just part. It will be complicated, she said. They have expectations about who you are. Let them, Harry said, with a shrug that was casual in a way that only years of divine confidence could produce. I'm not interested in being what they expect. She looked at him for a long moment. He met her gaze without shifting. We'll prepare you, she said. I'm already prepared, he said. More prepared, she said. He grinned, wide and genuine and unguarded, the grin that still sometimes caught her off guard because it was so entirely free, so completely without the shadow of what it might have been. All right, he said. More prepared. Susanoo's reaction, when she told him, was to immediately go outside and produce a thunderstorm of mild celebratory intensity that deposited 2 inches of rain on Ise in 40 minutes and which the Japan Meteorological Agency logged as anomalous and did not explain. He wants to go, Susanoo said, coming back inside wet and satisfied. I know he wants to go, Amaterasu said. I said we'll prepare him. He doesn't need more preparation. He needs to know the full wizarding world, she said. The politics. The blood hierarchy. The war history. What Voldemort built and what remains of it. He's going to walk into a world where people either worship him or want to use him, and I want him to be able to tell the difference immediately. Susanoo was quiet for a moment. The one who put him in the cupboard, he said. He'll be there. At the school. I know. Dumbledore, he said, the name sitting wrong in his mouth the way the names of people who had made choices he found contemptible tended to. Yes, she said. And you're sending Harry there. Harry wants to go, she said. And Harry can handle himself. I know he can. You're worried. He looked at her with the expression that appeared when he was done pretending not to be something. He's 10, he said. He's ours. Yes, I'm worried. She crossed the room and sat beside him and they were quiet for a moment in the specific way of people who have already made a decision and are simply letting themselves feel the weight of it before moving on. He'll be extraordinary, she said. He already is, Susanoo said. The year before Hogwarts was the most intensive. Amaterasu had him reading wizarding history with the same focused commitment he'd brought to divine texts, the founding of Hogwarts, the structure of the Ministry of Magic, the rise and fall of Voldemort, the pure-blood hierarchy and the politics that fed it, the nature of dark magic and how it differed from the kami concept of harm power. She taught him to manage his divine energy in a space that ran on different magical principles, to keep the storm in him from interfering with ambient wizard magic unless he wanted it to. Susanoo, characteristically, focused on what happened when management failed. He put Harry in every scenario he could construct where something went wrong, where the unexpected happened, where the opposition was faster or cleverer or more numerous, and he drilled into Harry not anxiety about these scenarios but the reflex of improvisation. The ability to look at a problem that had gone sideways and find the angle. You overthink the setup, Susanoo told him once, in the mountains, after a training exercise that had devolved into creative chaos. You're good on the setup. It's when it falls apart that I want to see you think fast. I was thinking fast, Harry said. He was sitting on a rock, slightly singed on one side, which happened. You hesitated at the pivot point. I was assessing. You have time to assess or time to act, Harry, rarely both. Know which one you're doing and do it completely. Harry looked at him. What if I assess and act at the same time? Susanoo paused. Show me. He showed him. It took 3 months of the year before Hogwarts, but by the end of it, Harry had developed what Susanoo called, with evident pride, a combat intelligence, the ability to process and act simultaneously, to make decisions at a speed that looked like instinct but was actually compressed analysis. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday in July, which was a warm day on the ISE Peninsula, the sea turquoise green and the air salt heavy, and Harry was in the water when Amaterasu appeared on the beach and held it up. He came out of the sea and stood dripping on the shore, and she held the envelope out and he took it and looked at it. The parchment was cream-colored and the ink was green and his name was written across it in a hand that was precise and old-fashioned, and above the address, which read simply The Shore, ISE, Japan, in a way that suggested the envelope had found him by means other than ordinary post. The Hogwarts crest was embossed in the wax seal. Harry turned it over. Turned it back. Looked at the crest. It found us, he said. It found you, Amaterasu said. He broke the seal and read the letter. Then he folded it and held it and looked out at the sea for a moment. Interesting, he said. Which was the word he used when he was actually feeling something larger but was still assembling it. We have 2 months, she said. He nodded. He looked at the letter again, at the Hogwarts crest, at the list of required materials that included a wand, which was the piece of British wizarding tradition he'd been least able to prepare for in theory and most curious about in practice. Susanoo's going to make it weird, Harry said. From somewhere up the shore, where Susanoo had been doing something with the weather, his voice carried back, I heard that. I know you did, Harry called back. I'm going to be completely normal about this. You cried, Harry said, when I learned to hold a thunderhead. I had ambient moisture in my eyes. It was a clear day. A pause. I'm going to be mostly normal about this. Harry grinned. He looked at the letter one more time, and the grin settled into something steadier, not a child's excitement but something more considered, the expression of someone who has been preparing for a long time and can finally see the shape of what comes next. Let's go, he said. I want to buy a wand. Amaterasu smiled. Behind him, the sea caught the afternoon sun and turned gold, and the summer light sat across the water like a promise already kept, and somewhere down the shore, Susanoo produced a small and celebratory crack of thunder that sent the gulls into the air in a white-winged scatter and made Harry laugh out loud, free and full and entirely unafraid of anything. He was 11 years old and the son of gods and the son of Lily and James Potter both, and the world he was walking into had built a story around the shape of his absence for a decade, and he was going to be absolutely nothing like what it expected. He was going to be so much better than that. Chapter 3, The boy who arrived. Diagon Alley smelled like old wood and candle wax and something underneath both that Harry couldn't name precisely, a low, persistent hum in the air that wasn't sound but registered like one, the particular texture of concentrated ambient magic pressing against his awareness the way a crowded room presses against someone used to open spaces. He stood just inside the leaky cauldron's back entrance, the brick wall still mid-rearrangement behind him, and looked at it. Amaterasu stood beside him, unhurried, watching his face rather than the alley. It's smaller than I expected, Harry said. Most things are. Not worse. Just smaller. He was already moving, reading storefronts with the focused attention he brought to new texts. Aesop's Owl Emporium. Madame Malkin's. The pale marble face of Gringotts at the far end, gleaming with a self-importance that Harry found immediately interesting. The magic here is layered. Old foundations with newer construction on top. Like most human institutions, she said. The Gringotts wards are different from everything else, he said. He'd felt them from the alley entrance, dense, deliberate, the architectural confidence of something that had been made by non-humans and had absolutely no interest in being made by humans instead. Goblin made, she said. The wards and the bank both. I want to look at those properly. Vault first. Looking second. He glanced at her sideways. You sound like Susanoo when you do the short sentences. Susanoo and I occasionally agree on priorities. She had arranged the Gringotts' visit in advance, a letter sent by means the goblins had found appropriately unusual, which had generated a reply written in the particular clipped style of a people who respected directness. Harry Potter's vault was accessible. His presence was expected. The letter had not mentioned Amaterasu by name, because her name tended to produce reactions in old magical beings that she preferred to manage in person. They walked the length of Diagon Alley and the people they passed did the thing that people always did around Amaterasu, moved slightly without knowing why, a half-step left or right, the animal reflex of clearing space for something that read as large even when it appeared human-sized. Some of them looked at Harry with the particular curiosity of people who thought they recognized something but couldn't place it. He had his mother's eyes and his father's face and he'd grown into himself cleanly, not tall yet but solid, balanced, with the particular quality of stillness that comes from training rather than temperament. Nobody stopped them. Nobody asked questions. Harry wore ordinary clothes and his hair was doing its usual structural rebellion and the scar on his forehead was covered by it anyway, so there was no particular reason for anyone to look twice. He was just a boy walking to a bank with someone who moved like sunlight had decided to take a human shape and go shopping. The goblin at the main Gringotts desk looked at them when they entered with the expression of someone who had seen a great many things across a great many centuries and had therefore developed a very good instinct for when something was worth paying attention to. His eyes moved to Amaterasu and stayed there for a moment, which was more attention than goblins typically gave to anything they weren't billing. Harry Potter, Harry said. I have an appointment. The goblin looked at him. Looked at Amaterasu again. Looked back at Harry with the expression of someone revising their initial assessment and finding the revision interesting. Indeed, he said. Griphook will take you. The cart ride into the vaults was exactly as dramatic as Harry had anticipated from his reading, the tracks plunging into darkness, the acceleration, the warm rush of deep earth air. He leaned into the turns and felt the goblin ward structure around him, layer after layer, each one with a different flavor of intent. He reached out with the thread of his awareness and felt them without touching them, the way you can feel the edge of something hot without burning yourself. His vault was number 687. When the door swung open and the lamplight hit the gold inside, Harry stood at the threshold and looked at it with an expression that was interested rather than overwhelmed. This was my parents', he said. Some of it, Amaterasu said. The Potter family vault is deeper. This is what was set aside for you. He stepped in and walked the perimeter slowly, and the gold under the lamplight was warm and ordinary looking, which was the thing about money, it looked exactly like itself regardless of what it represented. He took what he needed for school supplies, measured and deliberate, and came back out and the cart was waiting. On the way back up, Griphook looked at him once more. Harry met his eyes directly, which goblins apparently did not always expect from wizards, because something shifted in the goblin's expression, a small recalibration. Your mother was a remarkable witch, Griphook said. It was not a thing he said to many people. It was possibly not a thing he had said to anyone. I know, Harry said. I'm working on the remarkable part myself. The goblin's expression moved about 2 degrees towards something that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. He said nothing else. The cart reached the top. They were back in the alley with the vault visit concluded and the rest of the list ahead when Harry spotted the wand shop. Ollivander's was narrow and ancient, the kind of shop that appeared to be held together by the weight of accumulated significance rather than any structural engineering. The gold lettering above the door had the particular quality of gold that has been there long enough to become part of the thing it's on. Harry stood outside it and looked at the single wand displayed in the dusty window and felt something, not the buzz of the lightning feeling, not the steady warmth of the sun fire, but something separate and underneath both, the part of him that was born rather than gifted, the part that was his mother's and his father's and his own. "I'll wait here," Amaterasu said. He looked at her. "You can come in." "This is yours," she said. "This part." He looked at the shop, and then back at her, and something passed between them, not words, not the divine communication she and Susanoo used, but the particular kind of understanding that develops between people who have spent years paying close attention to each other. He went in. The interior was exactly as small as it looked from outside, and the boxes were stacked to the ceiling in columns that defied straightforward physics, and behind the counter, Ollivander appeared from between two towers of boxes with the unhurried manner of someone who had been expecting this visit for 11 years. He looked at Harry for a long time without speaking. Harry looked back without discomfort. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said finally, in the soft, precise voice of a man accustomed to information with weight. "I wondered when." "Here I am," Harry said. Ollivander moved closer and looked at Harry's forehead, at the scar, which was visible now, and then at his eyes, and then at his hands, which was unusual. "May I?" He reached toward Harry's right hand. Harry extended it. Ollivander's fingertips barely brushed Harry's palm and then stopped. His expression did something controlled and subtle. He pulled his hand back and looked at it and then at Harry. "Extraordinary," he said, very quietly. "The wand measurement?" Harry said. Ollivander blinked, returned from wherever he'd briefly gone, and began measuring without further comment, though his eyes kept returning to Harry's hands with the expression of someone reading text they couldn't quite decipher. The first wand. The second wand. The sixth wand. The 12th. Harry tried each one with the patient precision of someone running an experiment, feeling for the connection that Ollivander described as choosing, a warmth, a rightness, the sense of something recognizing something. Nothing happened until the 13th wand. Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches. When Harry wrapped his fingers around it, what happened was not the shower of sparks that Ollivander seemed to expect. What happened was that the wand went absolutely still in his hand, a stillness that was the opposite of inertia, the stillness of something that had found its position and had no intention of moving from it, and the sunfire warmth in Harry's chest moved down his arm and into the wand and the wand lit from within, golden white, steady, like a lamp. Ollivander stared at it. "Curious," he said, in a voice that suggested Curious was doing heavy work. "The phoenix that gave this feather," Harry said, "gave only one other feather. The wand that feather is in did something to my forehead." He said it factually, the way Amaterasu had taught him to approach information, plainly, without drama, because drama was for things that deserved it. Ollivander looked at him. "Yes," he said. "So we're connected, this Voldemort and I," Harry said. "Through the feathers. That is one way of framing it." Harry looked at the wand in his hand, the steady gold light of it. "Good," he said. "I'd rather know my connections than not." He paid 7 galleons and left. Amaterasu was exactly where she'd said she'd be, leaning against the alley wall with the kind of stillness that looked relaxed and was actually the very composed attention of someone who had been monitoring the surrounding area for anything that warranted monitoring. He held the wand up. The gold warmth in it was still there, quieter now, resting. "Holly and Phoenix Feather," he said. She looked at it, and then at him, and the warmth in her expression was the warmth of the sun in the corner of his old crayon drawings, finally close enough to matter. "Good," she said. The rest of the list took an hour. Madame Malkins produced robes, which Harry tried on with the efficiency of someone who had learned that clothes were functional rather than significant, though he appreciated that the school robes fit properly, which was an experience he hadn't had until he'd come to live with Amaterasu. Books from Flourish and Blots. He bought the required list and 4 additional texts that the list didn't include but which he'd identified from Amaterasu's teaching as relevant to understanding the school's magical foundations. A cauldron from the apothecary, and a brief but interesting conversation with the apothecary owner about the properties of dragon blood, which the man hadn't expected a first year to have opinions about and which Harry had several. He did not buy an owl. He considered the Ollery and Elops with genuine interest, but ultimately concluded that Hogwarts Post could function without his own owl. He bought a telescope and a set of brass scales and, because he was Harry and had been given a vault of gold and some latitude, a second set of potion ingredients that went beyond the standard kit. They were walking back toward the leaky cauldron when Harry stopped. 3 boys ahead, outside Madame Malkin's. No, he'd passed them earlier when he was getting robes. The blonde one had been inside getting fitted at the same time. The blonde boy was now standing with 2 considerably larger boys and a man who wore his robes like a person who found the concept of wearing ordinary clothes morally questionable. The man was talking to the blonde boy with the kind of precise, controlled attention that looked like affection from the outside and felt, Harry had learned from a decade of paying close attention to people, like instruction. The blonde boy's face was perfectly arranged. Too perfectly arranged for 11. The kind of expression someone wears when they've been taught that showing what you actually feel is a failure of discipline. Harry watched this for 3 seconds and filed it without judgment. Just information. Then the man, who had a face like someone had made a marble statue of arrogance and given it a wand and a lineage, glanced up and saw Harry. Or rather, saw the scar that Harry's hair wasn't quite covering at this angle. The expression that moved across the man's face was fast and multiple: recognition, calculation, appraisal, and something that Harry identified specifically as the expression of someone encountering a useful thing and immediately thinking about how to acquire it. Harry returned the look with complete neutrality. The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that wanted things. "You must be Harry Potter," he said. "I am," Harry said. "Lucius Malfoy." He extended a hand. His tone was the tone of someone who expected that name to produce a particular reaction. Harry shook the hand, firmly, briefly, without the submissiveness that the offered hand was angled toward. "Hello." Lucius Malfoy had not been shaken hands with like that in some time. The blonde boy, Draco, Harry recalled, because Amaterasu had covered wizarding family trees, looked at Harry with an expression that was somewhere between curiosity and the competitive wariness of someone being evaluated. "Starting at Hogwarts?" Lucius said. The calculation was still there, wearing the clothes of pleasant conversation. "Yes," Harry said. "You'll find," Lucius said, with the careful precision of a man planting something, "that certain families have more to offer than others, when it comes to navigating the school. I imagine," Harry said pleasantly, "that I'll find that certain kinds of advice are more useful than others, too." He smiled. Not a challenging smile. Just a smile. "Nice to meet you, Draco." Draco blinked. He'd been watching this exchange with the expression of someone whose script had gone off page. Harry moved on. Amaterasu fell into step beside him without comment, though he could feel, without looking, that she was amused in the precise, restrained way she was amused when he handled something well without assistance. "Lucius Malfoy," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "He's what's left of that world," Harry said. "The pure-blood hierarchy. He lost and survived, and he's been very careful about how he survived." "Very careful," she agreed. "He wanted me to be impressed by his name," Harry said. "Most people are," she said. Harry considered this. His son looked like he'd never met anyone who wasn't, he said, and there was something in his tone that wasn't contempt. Contempt would have been too simple, but was a kind of thoughtful recognition, one 11-year-old seeing another clearly. They went back through the leaky cauldron and onto Charing Cross Road, and London moved around them in its usual impervious fashion, and Harry held his bag of school supplies and looked at the city and felt the Hogwarts letter in his jacket pocket, a rectangle of parchment and possibility. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, Amaterasu confirmed. Susanoo, when they returned to ISE, handled the full supply list with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this and had opinions. He picked up each book and examined it, several with increasing skepticism. He held the copy of A History of Magic like it had personally offended him. "Bathilda Bagshot," he said. It's on the required list, Harry said. She got the Susanoo myth completely wrong, Susanoo said. The storm exile has 3 extra steps that she just omitted. She omitted them. I'll correct my margins, Harry said. Susanoo put the book down. He picked up the wand and looked at it, and his expression changed entirely, something quiet happening in it, the same thing that happened in his face when he watched Harry do something extraordinary. He held it very carefully and the Hollywood sat wrong in his hand because it was not his, it was Harry's, and he could feel that, a made thing choosing its person, older magic in its way than even he was accustomed to. Holly, he said. And Phoenix Feather, Harry said. Brother wand to Voldemort's. Susanoo handed the wand back. His face had gone to the specific stillness it went to when he was feeling something he was going to pretend was meteorological if anyone asked. Then when you face him, Susanoo said, and you will, don't use the wand for the moment that matters. Harry looked at him. Use what we gave you, Susanoo said. Not instead of, in addition to. You are more than one thing. I know, Harry said. I know you know, Susanoo said. I'm saying it anyway because it will matter. The last 2 weeks in ISE were quieter than usual. Not sad, nothing about leaving was sad exactly, because leaving was what Harry had been preparing for and what he genuinely wanted. But the quality of time changed the way it does when a thing is almost over, each ordinary moment acquiring a slight additional weight. Amaterasu taught him one more thing in those 2 weeks. Not combat, not power, not divine script. She sat with him in the evening and she talked to him about loneliness. You will not be lonely, she said. Not in the permanent sense. You know how to be with people. But you will have moments where you are alone in a room full of people who see a story rather than a person, and that is its own kind of isolation. What do I do? Harry asked. Find the people who see you, she said. They'll be there. They're always there. And be patient with the ones who don't, most of them are carrying their own versions of a cupboard. Harry was quiet with this for a moment. Then he said, what if I don't like it? What if Hogwarts is just, then it is what it is, she said, and you make the best of it. But Harry. She waited until he was looking at her. You have never been in a situation you couldn't handle. You have been in situations that were difficult, and situations that were surprising, and situations that required you to think fast. But never one you couldn't handle. He held that. He turned it over and checked it against his own experience and found that it was, factually, true. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. King's Cross on the 1st of September was a cathedral of noise and motion, the whistles of ordinary trains, the announcements echoing off Victorian ironwork, pigeons arguing in the rafters, the perpetual crowd of London commuters moving with the purposeful urgency of people who have somewhere to be and are annoyed about it. Harry came through the main entrance with a trolley carrying a trunk and stood in the concourse and looked at the board and found platforms 9 and 10. Then he found the barrier between them. He stood in front of it with his trolley and looked at it, and the magic on the other side was a different texture, old and specific and school-shaped. He walked straight through it without hesitation. Platform 9 3/4 was something. The Hogwarts Express was something. Scarlet steam engine, properly theatrical, exactly the way certain things should be. He had been a child raised by deities on divine shores and trained in the mountain storms of Japan, but he was also 11 years old, and an engine this red and this loud and this specifically designed to go to something called Hogwarts was, objectively, impressive. The platform was chaos in the pleasant sense, families, trunks, owls in cages, cats attempting escapes, small children being herded and larger children trying to look like they didn't need herding. Harry moved through it with the ease of someone who had been trained to navigate environments by reading their energy rather than their layout. He found a compartment near the middle of the train. He put his trunk up with the efficiency of someone who'd been learning to manage his own things since he was 4, and he sat and looked out the window as the platform crowd began to thin. The door slid open. The boy who looked in was red-haired and freckled and had ink on 2 fingers and what appeared to be something dried on his nose that he hadn't noticed yet. He looked at Harry with the open curiosity of someone who hadn't learned to be indirect about it. "Anyone sitting here?" "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Just me," Harry said. He came in and sat across from Harry, and they regarded each other with the mutual assessment of 11-year-olds meeting strangers, which is a remarkably direct social process at that age. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron's expression moved from casual to focused in a single step, his eyes going to Harry's forehead with the reflex that Harry had already identified as universal among wizarding people who'd grown up with the story. Sorry, I didn't," Ron stopped himself. Then, with a kind of admirable recalibration, he said, "That's mental, you're actually, sorry, we've just heard about you since forever." "What have you heard?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. Ron seemed to find this disarming, being asked directly. He settled in. "That you survived you-know-who when you were a baby. That you lived with muggles. That," he paused. "Actually nobody knows where you were for the last decade. My mum thought you were in hiding, but my brother George said you might be abroad somewhere." "Japan," Harry said. "Japan," Ron repeated, like this was not an answer he'd had in the running. "Why Japan?" "Family," Harry said. This satisfied Ron in the efficient way that family satisfies as an explanation, because everyone understood family even if they didn't understand the specifics. He nodded. "You know you're famous, right?" "I know people think they know who I am," Harry said. Ron looked at him for a moment. "That's a very different thing," he said slowly, with the particular thoughtfulness that lived under Ron Weasley's surface and that most people, Harry suspected, underestimated. "Yes," Harry said. "It is." They talked through the first hour of the journey, easily, circuitously, the way good conversations develop, following threads without agenda. Ron told him about Hogwarts from the perspective of someone who'd been hearing about it his whole life, with 7 family members who'd attended. Harry told him about Japan in the edited version he'd prepared, not the divine aspects, not yet, not because he was hiding but because some things required context, and Ron listened with the engaged interest of someone who'd grown up in a world he loved but hadn't always been able to see outside of. The trolley came. Harry bought an assortment of every kind of sweet available, partly from curiosity and partly because Amaterasu's voice in the back of his head said something about first experiences being worth full attention. He and Ron worked through the selection with the scientific approach of 2 people rating things honestly, which produced both a ranking and, by the end of it, a pile of chocolate frog cards that Ron began explaining with the infectious enthusiasm of a genuine collector. The compartment door opened again and a girl looked in, bushy hair, evaluating eyes, the expression of someone in mid-task. "Have you seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." "Not in here," Ron said. She was about to go when she looked at Harry and then at Ron and then back at Harry with the expression of someone arriving at a conclusion. "You're Harry Potter," she said, but where everyone else had said it with reverence or surprise, she said it with the tone of someone checking an entry in a reference text. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the standard course books, of course, but I've also gone through Hogwarts, a history twice and most of the supplemental." She stopped herself, as if remembering that not everyone organized social introductions around academic credentials. "Sorry. Do you know what house you think you'll be in?" "Not yet," Harry said. "I've been hoping for Gryffindor," she said. "Or Ravenclaw. The sorting criteria are interesting, courage versus intellect, though obviously they're not mutually exclusive. Gryffindor's Albus Dumbledore went on to be considered the greatest. What do you think the sorting actually measures?" Harry asked. She blinked, slightly wrong-footed by the question being turned back. "Personality traits," she said. "Traits or values," he said. She looked at him properly, actually looked, the way she looked at texts she found worth engaging. "That's not a distinction the books make," she said. "No," he said. "But it's probably the right one." Something shifted in Hermione Granger's expression, from the polite engagement of someone being socially appropriate with strangers to the sharper, more alive expression of someone who had found something worth thinking about. She came in and sat down. Ron looked between them with the expression of someone watching a tennis match and finding it unexpectedly watchable. They talked about the sorting. They talked about magic theory. Hermione had read more widely than any other first-year Harry was likely to meet, and her framework was precise and well-constructed even if it was built entirely from textbook architecture rather than practical experience, and Harry found himself genuinely engaged in filling the gaps and having his own framework challenged in return. She pushed back on him 3 times, twice correctly and once not, and he adjusted once and held his ground once and enjoyed both equally. Ron ate chocolate frogs and contributed occasional observations that were consistently more insightful than his delivery suggested, and Harry noticed this and filed it. They were somewhere in the Scottish Highlands when Hermione said, frowning at something she'd been working through mentally, "You know things that aren't in any of the standard texts." "I had an unusual education," Harry said. "Where?" "You said Japan, but there aren't British magical schools in Japan." "Not British magical schools, no," he said. She looked at him, and she was too perceptive not to notice that this was not quite an answer, and she was too direct not to flag it. "Are you being deliberately vague?" "A bit," he said pleasantly. "Why?" "Because some things require context that takes longer than a train journey," he said. "But I'll tell you eventually. If you're still curious." "I'm always curious," she said, like this should have been obvious. "Good," he said. "So am I." Ron looked between them again with the expression he'd been wearing for the last hour, which was the expression of someone who has found 2 people he is genuinely glad to know and isn't quite sure what to do with this feeling yet. The train began to slow. Outside, darkness had fallen, real darkness, Scottish rural darkness, the kind that isn't diluted by streetlights or city glow. Harry looked out the window and saw the first lights of what must be Hogsmeade, and beyond them and above, on its promontory, something enormous and lit and complicated against the sky. His first sight of Hogwarts was from the lake, in the boat, with the mountains behind it and the reflections in the black water and the lights in every tower. He'd read descriptions of it. He'd read Hogwarts, a history. He'd even seen a sketch in one of Amaterasu's texts. None of it was the same as being in a wooden boat on a dark lake looking up at it, because books are good at most things but they are specifically bad at scale. It was vast. Not vast in the way of something that has been built to impress, though it had that quality too, but vast in the way of something that had accumulated itself across centuries, each edition made by people who believed it mattered, and this collective belief had produced something that went beyond the architectural into something almost geological. It had the quality of mountains and old-growth forests, the quality of things that have absorbed enormous amounts of human experience and have been changed by it. Harry looked at it and felt, very clearly, the ancient magic of its foundations, the 4 original enchantments, each different in temperament, the accumulated generations of student and teacher and argument and discovery and the ordinary extraordinary business of people learning how to be themselves somewhere safe enough to try. He felt something else too. Higher up, at the top of the North Tower, a light was burning in a window. And from that window, a magical awareness was resting on the boats below in the particular way that powerful people pay attention, precise, patient, and very much already knowing what it was looking for. Harry looked at the window and said nothing, and the boat moved across the black water, and he filed that too. The great hall was the great hall, impossible ceiling, for long tables, candles that floated with the serene confidence of things that had been floating for a very long time and found it perfectly natural. Harry walked in behind the other first years and felt 400 sets of eyes and did not find this interesting enough to be uncomfortable. He looked up at the ceiling, Amaterasu had told him about it, charmed to reflect the sky outside, and it was showing the same dark Scottish night he'd looked up at from the lake. He felt the magic in the enchantment. Excellent construction. Someone who had understood the difference between an illusion and a reflection. He looked at the high table, and at the man at the center of it. Albus Dumbledore was older than Harry had expected, though he'd known the age and numbers, old in the way of someone who had been careful about surviving. His eyes were very blue and very attentive above his half-moon spectacles, and they found Harry the moment Harry entered the hall with the precision of someone who had been watching that doorway for exactly this arrival. Harry met his gaze. Dumbledore's expression moved, barely, controlled, but it moved. Something in it recalibrated. Harry moved it on. He had the sorting to attend to. The sorting hat came alive on the stool and delivered its song, which Harry found genuinely interesting as an enchanted object, old, complex, layered with the decision-making architecture of its original makers. When it called names and students went forward, Harry watched each sorting with the attention of someone reading a landscape for information. Potter, Harry. The hall went from quiet to a particular electric silence, the kind produced by 300 people simultaneously not making a sound on purpose. Harry walked to the stool and sat down, and the hat came down over his eyes. The darkness inside the hat was deep and close, and then the hat's awareness pressed against his and stopped. "Oh," said the hat. Not words exactly, the hat communicated in something closer to direct impression, but Harry translated it to words because that was how he processed. "Oh, that's, hello," Harry thought back. I've sorted 11,472 students in 831 years, the hat said, with the tone of something reviewing its own credentials. "I have not encountered, what?" Harry said. The hat seemed to be recovering. "There are 2 things in you," it said. "Perhaps 3. The one you were born with. The one you survived. And the ones you were given." "Yes," Harry said. "The ones you were given those are not human." "No. You understand, I don't have a category for this. I'd be surprised if you did." The hat was quiet for a moment, in which Harry could feel it actually working, running its criteria, checking its parameters, feeling through the layers of what Harry was. He waited patiently. Gryffindor, the hat said finally, would be the easy answer. Courage, yes. Exceptional courage. The kind that doesn't notice it is courage because it has never known the alternative. "But?" Harry prompted. "But you are more curious than daring. More strategic than reckless. You think in layers, you read people the way other people read text, you value knowledge because you've been taught that knowledge is respect for the truth of things." A pause. "That's Ravenclaw. Is it a choice?" Harry asked. "Everything I do is a choice," the hat said, with something that might have been dignity. "The question is what you want." Harry thought about this. About Amaterasu asking him what house he thought he'd be in and him saying not yet. About the conversation on the train with Hermione about traits versus values. "Where will I be most useful?" he asked. The hat went very still. "That," it said, "is not a question I am asked. What do people usually ask? Where they belong. Where they'll be safe. Where their friends are going. Those are good questions," Harry said. "Mine is different." "Yes," the hat said. It thought for a moment longer. "Gryffindor will challenge you more than Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw will feed your mind, but Gryffindor will require you to build things, connections, loyalties, the kind of knowledge that comes from people rather than books. And you will need those things for what's coming." "Then Gryffindor," Harry said. "Gryffindor," the hat announced. The Gryffindor table produced the loudest response of the evening, because Harry Potter's name was Harry Potter's name regardless of the decade of absence, and 300 students had grown up on the story. He walked to the table and found a seat, and the cheering was genuine and warm, and he received it with a nod and a slight smile and sat down, and then he looked back up at the high table. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression that was impossible to read in full, pleasure and calculation, and something underneath both that was not quite worry but was in the same direction. Harry looked at him for one more second. Then he looked away, because he had a banquet to eat and 2 people he was already considering friends and a year of Hogwarts ahead of him, and Dumbledore would have his time when it was Dumbledore's time. Across the table, Ron was piling his plate with roast potatoes and already talking, and next to him, Hermione had a book out that she was reading while simultaneously eating, which Harry thought was extraordinary multitasking, and above them all, the enchanted ceiling showed the Scottish night moving from clear to partly cloudy, a weather front coming in from the west, and far, far above the clouds that were arriving over Hogwarts, invisible and very far away, something rolled once like satisfaction and then was quiet. Harry looked up at the ceiling and smiled. Then he helped himself to roast chicken and got on with it. Chapter 4, Storm Season. The thing about Hogwarts magic was that it was genuinely interesting. Harry had expected it to feel small, cantrips and classroom exercises after a decade of storms and sunfire and divine script. He had prepared himself to be patient about it the way you prepare to be patient about something you've already outgrown. What he hadn't prepared for was the actual texture of it, the specific flavor of wand magic channeled through a tradition that had been building on itself for 800 years, each generation's discoveries layered into the next like geological strata. His first charms lesson with Flitwick was the moment he understood this. The Wingardium Leviosa charm was not, on its surface, impressive, a feather, rising. But underneath the surface, if you paid attention to the actual mechanism, it was a precise negotiation between the caster's intent and the physical world, conducted through a medium, the wand, that had been specifically tuned to that caster's particular magical signature. The efficiency of it. The elegance. Divine power was vast and direct and operated through a different kind of authority entirely, but this was a different achievement, centuries of human beings working out how to do extraordinary things with a stick and focused will. Flitwick looked alarmed when his feather hit the ceiling. Mr. Potter, perhaps a touch less, enthusiasm, sorry, Harry said, and meant it. He'd been paying too much attention to the mechanism and not enough to the calibration. He walked it back and the feather descended and hovered at precisely the required level, perfectly still. Flitwick looked at it. Then at Harry. Then back at the feather with the expression of a man who had been teaching for decades and occasionally encountered something that required him to revise his benchmarks. Hermione, sitting next to Harry, had also gotten hers on the first try and was looking between Harry's feather and her own with the expression of someone running comparative analysis. You adjusted it, she said, quietly. Overshot, Harry said. How did you feel the overshoot? Most people can't tell until the feather does something wrong. You could feel it too, Harry said. She paused. Then, with the honest admission of someone who would always rather be accurate than seem impressive, I felt it when it moved too fast. Not before. Before is more useful, he said. Obviously, she said. How? He thought about how to explain a decade of divine energy calibration in terms that translated to wand mechanics. The intent leaves your hands before the magic does, he said. If you catch the intent before it leaves, you can adjust it. Hermione stared at him. She looked at her wand. She looked at the feather. She put the wand down and picked it up again and tried, and her feather rose at a perfect, even pace with the precision of someone who had been told exactly which gear to look at. She looked at him with an expression that he was learning to recognize, the expression she wore when she'd acquired something she considered genuinely valuable. Where did you learn that? She said. Japan, he said. She had learned, in the 6 weeks since the train, to understand that Japan was a real answer that contained other answers she didn't have context for yet, and that pressing on it produced interesting conversation but not revelation, and she had enough intellectual self-respect to wait for context rather than chase the thing without it. You'll explain eventually, she said. Eventually, he agreed. Transfiguration with McGonagall was its own satisfaction. McGonagall was the kind of teacher Harry respected immediately, which was not something he extended automatically. She was precise, demanding, and completely without the performative patience that mediocre teachers used as a substitute for actual engagement with their students. She had high expectations and she held them without apology, and when someone met them, her acknowledgement was brief and genuine rather than elaborate and hollow. She turned her desk into a pig on the first day and turned it back, and Harry noted the specific quality of the transformation, the way it moved through the form rather than jumping between states, the continuous nature of the change, and found the underlying principle before she'd explained it, which he kept to himself because there was a difference between having understood something and knowing when to speak. He transformed his match to a needle with the silver point and uniform dimensions that earned a brief nod from McGonagall and a longer glance that said she was already recalibrating her expectations for the year, which was, Harry had found, the most consistently interesting thing that happened when he encountered a genuinely good mind. Ron, beside him, had managed a needle that was mostly needle with aspirations. "Yours looks like it came from a shop," Ron said, with more admiration than resentment, which Harry noted was one of Ron's consistently good qualities. "Yours looks like it's been thinking about being a needle," Harry said. Ron looked at it. "That's weirdly accurate. I was going for needle but I kept thinking about the match underneath." "Stop thinking about the match," Harry said. "Think about what a needle does. Not what it looks like. What it does." Ron tried again. The needle that came out was sharp and clean, and Ron looked at it with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd been shown the right door rather than the right path. Potions was the complicated one. Snape arrived in a swirl of black robes, which Harry found both theatrical and probably deliberate, and began speaking in that measured, velvet dangerous voice about the precise science of potions and the glory of it, and Harry listened with genuine interest because the man clearly knew his subject deeply, and people who knew things deeply were worth listening to regardless of what else they were. Then Snape looked at him. "Potter," he said. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked at him. "Tell me," Snape said, with the precision of someone selecting the sharpest tool available, "what I would get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood." "Draught of living death," Harry said. "Though the preparation matters as much as the ingredients, the wormwood infusion temperature and the grinding fineness of the asphodel both affect the potency significantly." Snape blinked. Once. It was barely perceptible, but Harry caught it. "Where would you look," Snape said, adjusting, "if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat," Harry said. Though the specific species of goat matters for the quality, mountain goats produce stronger bezoars because of the mineral content in their diet, which is something Borage mentions in advanced potion making but not in the standard first-year text. The room had gone very quiet. Snape stood with the particular stillness of someone who had prepared a sequence and had it interrupted before the designed outcome arrived. His expression was controlled, but Harry was good at expressions. "What is the difference?" Snape said, going to the third question with the adjustment of someone taking a different angle, between monkshood and wolfsbane. "The same plant," Harry said. "Different names in different traditions." Aconitum. The naming inconsistency is a documented problem in potion standardization. Slug and Jiggers covered it in the 1973 Standards Review, but the curriculum hasn't caught up. A longer silence. Snape looked at him with an expression that was doing several things. The prepared cruelty of the beginning of the lesson had run directly into something that didn't cooperate with the expected dynamic, not defiance, not arrogance, just a student who knew the answers and said so plainly, which was a different problem entirely and one that Snape's specific approach had not been calibrated for. "It appears," Snape said finally, "that fame isn't entirely without value." The contempt was still there, but it had been improvised rather than planned, and Harry recognized the difference. "I wasn't famous in Japan," Harry said. "I just read the books." Ron was making a very controlled effort not to look impressed by this, which meant he was extremely impressed. Hermione had her textbook slightly raised in a way that didn't hide her expression from Harry's angle. Snape moved on. He was too intelligent not to. The potion they brewed that lesson went well, and Harry's was correct and the color was accurate, and Snape acknowledged this with a silence that was marginally less hostile than his silence about other things, which Harry catalogued as the nearest thing to a compliment the man would produce and found it sufficient. What Harry found more interesting than the acknowledgement was the brief flash of something in Snape's eyes when he'd looked at Harry's face at the beginning of class, before the celebrity comment, before the performance of hostility had begun. Something quick and uncontrolled that lived near grief, like someone seeing a letter from a person who was no longer alive. Gone in a second. But there. Harry had seen it, filed it, and built a theory around it that he confirmed 2 weeks later when he found a brief mention in a history of the First War, Lily Evans, potions prodigy, best friend to Severus Snape before the divergence of their paths. He didn't do anything with this information. He just held it, the way Amaterasu had taught him to hold information, with respect for its weight, without rushing to use it. The month of October settled into the rhythm of a school that had its own seasons independent of the weather, Quidditch tryouts producing daily drama on the ground floor corridors, the first essays coming due and sorting people by their relationship to deadlines, the social architecture of 4 houses moving through its cycles of alliance and friction. Harry observed all of it with the interested attention he brought to new places, and he made himself useful in the specific way he'd learned was most genuine, not by performing capability, but by paying attention when other people needed it. He helped Neville Longbottom with his herbology notes twice, not because Neville was failing. Neville was better at herbology than he was at believing he was good at herbology, which was the actual problem, but because Harry had noticed that Neville responded to specific confirmation rather than general encouragement. He'd mentioned this to Hermione, who had immediately incorporated it into how she talked to Neville, which was how Harry knew Hermione was going to be someone worth knowing for a long time. Draco Malfoy existed in Harry's peripheral vision the way that persistent background conditions exist, not a threat, not a priority, but present and producing data. He had tried, twice in September, to establish the social hierarchy that his father had presumably briefed him on, the pure blood framework, the correct alliances, the appropriate contempt for certain people. The first time he'd done it directly toward Harry, who had looked at him with complete equanimity and said, "That sounds like your father's opinion. What's yours?" and watched Draco's expression go through 4 different things in 2 seconds before he left. The second time, Draco had directed it toward Ron, which Harry found significantly less interesting as a social move and significantly more irritating. "You are aware," Harry said to Draco, not raising his voice, in the corridor outside the Great Hall while Draco was finishing a comment about the Weasley family's economic situation, that the things you're saying are things someone else put in your head and you haven't examined them once to see if they're actually yours. Draco's expression sharpened. It's a genuine observation," Harry said. "You're clearly not stupid. So why are you saying things you didn't think of yourself as if they're your own conclusions?" Draco stared at him. The 2 large boys who accompanied him everywhere, Crabbe and Goyle, who Harry had assessed as loyal and not particularly analytical, looked at each other. Ron was making the specific expression of someone watching something unexpected and finding it excellent. "You don't know anything about me," Draco said. "I know you want to be taken seriously," Harry said. "On your own terms, not your father's. I can see that very clearly." He said it without edge, as an observation. The pure blood routine doesn't get you there. It just repeats someone else's argument. He walked into the Great Hall, and Ron fell into step beside him, and behind them Draco stood in the corridor with an expression that was caught somewhere between fury and something that was beginning to look, painfully, like thinking. "How do you do that?" Ron asked. "Do what?" "Say things that make people feel called out without it being an insult." "Insulting him doesn't help either of us," Harry said. "Making him think might, eventually." Ron considered this while helping himself to toast. "You're a strange person," he said, with genuine warmth. "Thank you," Harry said. The Quidditch issue arrived in the 3rd week of October, and it arrived the way problems at Hogwarts tended to arrive, through a combination of institutional inflexibility and bad luck, with a side of someone making a situation worse through the specific arrogance of someone who had always been permitted to. Marcus Flint was Slytherin's Quidditch captain in the way that some people become captains, through aggression and the particular willingness to win by any means necessary that certain people called determination. He was also, Harry had established, the kind of person who made his decisions based on what he could take rather than what he could earn, which was a fundamental orientation problem that produced predictable patterns. The incident began at 2,000 feet, during Gryffindor's first match against Slytherin, on a grey October afternoon with the wind coming from the north and carrying rain that had not quite committed to arriving. Harry was in the stands. He was not on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. He'd chosen not to try out, not because he couldn't fly, but because Quidditch felt like a commitment of time that he was currently directing elsewhere, and he told Wood this plainly, which had produced a reaction from Oliver Wood that suggested Wood considered this a personal philosophical injury. He was watching with Ron and Hermione, eating a bag of crisps that Hermione had produced from somewhere and annotating a charms essay in his head when the weather made its decision about the rain. It came in fast. Faster than it should have. The front had been hanging offshore all morning and something had accelerated it, and the wind shifted from north to northwest and brought the rain in a wall and the temperature dropped 6 degrees in 90 seconds, which was not normal atmospheric behavior. Harry looked up at the sky with the specific attention he reserved for weather and felt it. The energy in the front was wrong. Too coherent. Too directed. The kind of coherence that sometimes appeared naturally in strong systems but was more often, in his experience, produced deliberately. He filed this. On the pitch, the game was continuing through the rain with the grim determination of a sport whose participants had decided that weather was the other side's problem. Gryffindor's seeker, a fifth-year named Ananya who flew with technical precision if not extraordinary instinct, was tracking the pitch for the snitch while managing a broom that was beginning to misbehave in the gusting crosswind. The gust that hit her came from exactly the wrong angle. Not a natural gust, Harry felt its shape in the air, the deliberate redirection of a pocket of air into a channel, the kind of thing someone who understood wind could do with the right charm from the right position. He was on his feet before Ananya's broom had fully reacted. Her broom pitched sideways and then down, with the committed velocity of something that had lost its argument with physics. She grabbed the shaft with both hands and the broom pulled out of the dive at 40 feet and she was clear. She was fine, breathless and angry, but the broom had thrown her forward and she was holding on with one hand and the other hand's grip had been on the snitch. The snitch, freed, arrowed straight up. At the same moment, a Slytherin bludger, which had been redirected, Harry noted, with a swing that put far more spin on it than standard play required, came in at the Gryffindor keeper from the left side. Davies didn't see it until it was 6 feet away. At that distance, at that speed, on a rain-wet broom in a crosswind, there was no reasonable maneuver available. Harry stepped over the railing of the stands. He didn't think about it. The bludger was going to hit Davies in the ribs at a speed that was going to break several things. Davies was already committed to his position, and Harry had approximately 2 seconds. He stepped over the railing, dropped 30 feet through the air with the comfortable confidence of someone who had done this from much greater heights beginning at age 4, landed on his feet on the pitch in the crouch position Susanoo had built into his reflexes over 6 years of cliff jumping, and stood up. He raised his right hand toward the bludger. The sunfire in his chest came forward in the way it came forward when he needed precision, not a broad wash but a focused point, and he sent it at the bludger in a thin concentrated beam that lasted half a second and hit the iron ball dead center. The bludger, which was enchanted to be difficult to stop, hit something it had never encountered before, not a beater's bat, not a shield charm, but a focused column of genuine solar energy, and slowed, turned, and fell to the grass 6 feet from Davies, smoking gently. The stands went absolutely silent. Davies looked at the bludger on the grass. He looked at Harry. The referee, Madame Hooch, banked sharply on her broom and came down to Harry's altitude and looked at him with an expression that was managing several very different emotions at once. Harry became aware that several hundred people were looking at him and that what had just happened was visible to all of them and was not explicable by any standard first-year wizarding capability. He considered caring about this and decided not to. Interference. Flint was shouting from the Slytherin end, his voice carrying over the rain. That's interference. He was on the pitch, that's a foul. The bludger was illegally redirected, Harry said, to Madame Hooch, not to Flint. I watched the swing. The angle and spin were deliberate. And the wind that put Ananya in trouble wasn't weather, it was a directed charm from behind the Slytherin stands, which is also not standard play. Madame Hooch stared at him. She was not a woman easily surprised and she was being surprised. I want the match reviewed, Harry said. Or replayed under honest conditions. Not because we lost the current game, Ananya still had the snitch in her hand when the broom pitched, so the game state is arguable anyway, but because playing a match that's been rigged is a waste of everyone's afternoon. Flint was still shouting. Harry looked at him for the first time, without heat, with the same equanimity he brought to most things, and Flint ran directly into that gaze and stopped mid-sentence with the particular experience of someone who had been expecting either fear or matching aggression and had received neither. "You," Harry said to Flint, "should talk to your beaters about their swing mechanics. Whatever you told them to do to that bludger, someone was going to end up in the hospital wing. That's not competitive. That's just badly directed." McGonagall arrived on the pitch. She had been in the staff stands and she had walked across the pitch with the contained energy of someone exerting considerable control over their own pace. She looked at Harry. She looked at the smoking bludger. She looked at Harry again with an expression that was running at capacity. "My office," she said. "After the match." "Of course," Harry said. He walked back to the stands. The stands were still quiet in the specific way of hundreds of people who have all had the same thought at the same time and have not yet worked out how to talk about it. He stepped back over the railing, which was perhaps not the cleanest entrance, and sat down next to Ron and Hermione. Ron was staring at him. "What," he said, "was that?" "Stopped a bludger," Harry said, picking up his crisps. "You stopped a bludger," Ron said. "With your hand." "With focused energy," Harry said. "From your hand." "Yes." "That's not, what, Harry, what was that?" "Genuinely." "What was that?" "I'll explain later," Harry said. "Then, because it was true and Ron deserved it, I promise." Hermione had not said anything, which was its own kind of statement. She was looking at him with the expression she wore when she was rapidly and comprehensively reorganizing her existing understanding of something. He could see the process happening in real time. "How long?" she said. "My whole life," he said. "Mostly. The specific kind, since I was 6. "Japan," she said. "Japan," he said. She was quiet for another moment. "You said you had family there," she said. "Not British magical family." "Not British," he agreed. "Not magical in the standard sense." Her expression moved into the specific territory it occupied when she was about to ask something she suspected was large. "What are they?" Harry looked at her steadily. The match had resumed, Ananya had recovered and was back on her broom, and the Slytherin play had notably cleaned up under the attentiveness of Madame Hooch, who was now watching every swing and every wind, and the crowd noise was returning to normal around them. "Old," Harry said. "Very old. The oldest things in the Japanese tradition." Hermione sat with this. Her expression went through several revisions. Then she said, very quietly, "Divine origin." "Yes," Harry said. She was silent for a full 10 seconds, which for Hermione was a geological age. "Both of them," she said. "Both of them. Storm and, the other thing. What you did to the bludger." "Son," he said. She looked at the stand railing where he'd stepped over it. She looked at the patch of pitch where he'd landed. She looked at him. "This is why you always know things that aren't in the books," she said. "Some of it," he said. "How much of what the books say about you is wrong?" "Most of it," he said. "Not about my parents. About me." She nodded slowly, with the nod of someone integrating large information and finding it, ultimately, consistent with existing evidence. "You should have told us sooner," she said, and there was no accusation in it, just the honest opinion of someone who valued completeness. "I was waiting for the right context," he said. "A bludger is apparently the right context," she said. "I didn't plan the bludger," he said. "No," she said, almost smiling. "I gathered." McGonagall's office was small and full of the particular energy of a room that belonged to a highly competent person, everything in its place, a faint smell of parchment and something that might have been tartan, the portraits of former professors looking down with varied expressions. McGonagall looked at Harry from behind her desk with an expression that had been through several stages and had arrived at something he identified as complex respect mixed with genuine concern, which was a combination he could work with. That, she said, was the most extraordinary and the most rule-violating thing I have witnessed in 31 years of teaching. The bludger was going to hit Davies at an injurious speed, Harry said. The correct course of action is to alert a referee, she said. There was no time, he said. You jumped off a 30-foot railing, she said. I've fallen from significantly further, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Harry, she said, and she used his first name, which she rarely did, and it changed the texture of the conversation. What you did this afternoon is going to be talked about. It is going to reach ears that I would prefer it didn't reach before I understand what it was. Solar energy focus, Harry said. Not wand magic. Different origin. The origin being Japan, she said. Yes. Specifically. Amaterasu, he said. He watched her face. The name landed, she was educated enough in comparative mythology for it to land. And Susanoo. They raised me. After Privet Drive. McGonagall was very still for a moment. After Privet Drive, she said slowly. After Privet Drive, he said. She stood up and walked to her window and looked out at the pitch where the match had concluded and students were making their way back to the castle. She stood there for long enough that Harry simply waited, because he understood that she was processing something that required time. Does Dumbledore know you're here? She said. He knows I received my letter, Harry said. He knows I'm at Hogwarts. He saw me sorted. He paused. He doesn't know the full picture. He'll want to talk to you, she said. I expect so, Harry said. She turned from the window and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had taught for 30 years and had her own complicated history with the school's headmaster and had just been handed information that intersected with several important things. And when he does? I'll be honest with him, Harry said. I'm honest with everyone. It's more efficient. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face moved, not sentiment exactly, but a recognition. Minerva, she said quietly. Harry blinked. Off the record, she said. You may call me Minerva, off the record, when there is no one else present, if you are the person I believe you to be. It was, Harry understood, a significant offer. From her, and from what it meant about how she was choosing to position herself. He nodded once. Thank you, Minerva. She sat back down and folded her hands. 20 points to Gryffindor for preventing a serious injury to a fellow student, she said. 10 points from Gryffindor for pitch interference. The match result will be reviewed. A beat. And a very strong suggestion that when the headmaster requests a meeting, which will be within the week, you bring the same clarity you've brought to this conversation. I intend to, Harry said. He left her office and found Ron and Hermione waiting in the corridor, which he'd expected. Hermione had her arms folded and was looking at the floor in the specific posture of someone who had been thinking continuously since the last time she'd spoken. Ron had the expression of someone who had also been thinking but in a different way, the expression of someone who had decided he was fine with things he didn't fully understand yet as long as the person at the center of them was the person he'd been eating chocolate frogs with since September. So, Ron said. So, Harry said. Gods, Ron said. Yes. Ron nodded. Absorbed. Nodded again. Right, he said. Both kinds. Storm and sun. Yes. And you've just had that, since you were, what, for, Harry said. Roughly. Ron exhaled. Mental, he said. That's completely mental. And then, with the warmth that was the most essential thing about him, also excellent. Genuinely. That thing with the bludger was the best thing I've ever seen on a Quidditch pitch. Harry felt something warm move through his chest that was not sunfire. Thanks, Ron. Hermione was still looking at the floor. Then she looked up. You could have been hurt, she said. Stepping over that railing without a wand and without, I mean, you knew what you were doing, I can see that, but, you acted without calculating the calculation was fast, Harry said. Not absent. How fast? Fast enough, he said. She looked at him. That's not a satisfying answer. It's the accurate one, he said. Sometimes fast enough is all you've got. She considered this with the honest rigor she brought to everything and said, that's true, in the particular tone of someone acknowledging a point they'd have preferred to argue. They walked back through the castle, the torches lit and the stone warm from a day's worth of inhabited heat, the particular sound of Hogwarts settling into evening, and Harry felt the place around him with the layered awareness he brought to all old things. The wards in the walls. The magic in the foundations. The enormous, complicated, achingly human project of a place built to teach children how to be extraordinary. He also felt, from the direction of the 7th floor, a specific magical awareness that he'd been cataloguing since his first night here, patient, attentive, very much already planning the conversation it was going to have with him. Not yet, Harry thought, in the general direction of Dumbledore's office. But soon. The week wound down. Thursday's defense against the dark arts lesson was, as it had been every Thursday, an exercise in managing his own attention while Quirrell stuttered through material that Harry could have delivered more clearly in his sleep. He sat at the back and took notes and did the actual learning through the textbook, and he was good at managing his attention until the moment, somewhere in the middle of Quirrell's explanation of counter-jinxes, when something moved behind the professor's eyes. Not Quirrell's eyes. Something behind Quirrell's eyes. Harry kept his face neutral. His pen continued moving. He wrote down Quirrell's words and underneath them, in the divine script that Amaterasu had taught him, he wrote, 2 presences, 1 body, the second one hostile, dark magic origin, significant power. Then he capped his pen and listened to the rest of the lesson. After class, walking back through the corridor, Hermione appeared beside him. You went quiet, she said. Thinking, he said. About Quirrell? He looked at her sideways. She met his look with the expression of someone who had been paying attention since September and had been drawing her own conclusions. You felt it too, he said. Something's wrong with him, she said. I thought it was just nerves, but today it was different, Harry said. More present, she said. Whatever it is. I need to check something, Harry said. In the library. Don't come, not yet. She stopped walking. He looked at her and she looked back with the expression of someone who had been told not to come and was making an active decision about whether to honor that. Tomorrow, he said. I'll tell you everything I know. Tonight I need to think it through. Everything, she said. Everything, he confirmed. She nodded. Tomorrow, she said, with the tone of a commitment being taken seriously on both sides. He went to the library. He found the texts on dark magic classification and he read them quickly, and the thing he found confirmed what the divine script in his notes had already said, the nature of what he'd felt behind Quirrell's eyes. The particular flavor of dark magic that lived beyond ordinary dark magic. The kind that required extraordinary loss to produce and extraordinary desperation to maintain. And then Friday arrived, and with it, a note in the neat handwriting of the headmaster's secretary. The headmaster requests the pleasure of your company at your earliest convenience. His office is on the 7th floor. The password is sherbet lemon. Harry folded the note and put it in his pocket and looked out the window of the great hall at the grey October sky, where a weather front was sitting offshore with the patient energy of something that had been told to wait. He was ready. Chapter 5, the corridor at the end of everything. The gargoyle moved aside without waiting for the password. Harry stood on the moving staircase as it wound upward in its slow spiral and looked at the stone walls passing him and felt the ambient magic of the headmaster's office pressing against his awareness from above, old, layered, the specific magical density of a space that a very powerful person had inhabited for a very long time. Power left marks on places the way water left marks on stone. Slow, indelible, and entirely informative about the nature of what had been there. He knocked. Come in, Harry. The office was circular and cluttered in the specific way of someone whose interests were genuine rather than performed, books on every surface, instruments Harry didn't recognize making soft sounds and emitting the occasional wisp of smoke, portraits of former headmasters asleep or pretending to be. A bowl of sweets on the desk. And behind the desk, Albus Dumbledore, in robes of deep blue, looking at Harry over his half-moon spectacles with the full weight of an attention that had been building toward this conversation for 11 years. Harry sat down in the offered chair without being asked and looked back. The silence lasted 4 seconds, which was longer than most silences in this office lasted. Dumbledore broke it first. "I owe you an apology," he said. Harry had not expected that opening. He kept his expression neutral and waited. "Privet Drive," Dumbledore said. He said it the way people say names of places they regret. "I made a decision based on an incomplete model. I believed the blood protection was the most important variable. I underweight." He paused, and Harry could see the man genuinely choosing his words rather than performing the choice, the human cost of the environment. "The environment," Harry said. "That's an interesting word for it." Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were steady but not comfortable. "What word would you use?" "My cousin had a room," Harry said. "I had a cupboard. Locked from the outside." He said it without weight, the way Amaterasu had taught him to say important things, clearly, without the armor of anger or the deflection of humor. Just the plain fact of it. "I'm not telling you this for an apology. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I know exactly what that decision was, and what it cost." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His expression was one of the few Harry had encountered that he couldn't fully read. It had too many layers, each one genuine, which paradoxically made the whole harder to decipher than simple concealment would have been. "The family who has been raising you," Dumbledore said, shifting carefully. "In Japan." "Yes. I have been, attempting to understand who they are," he said. The words that were on Privet Drive indicated something had overridden them. "The nature of the override was unlike anything in my experience." "That would be them, yes," Harry said. "You'll forgive me for wanting to understand," Dumbledore said, and his tone was measured, the tone of someone being scrupulously reasonable, who has had access to you for the last decade. Harry looked at him. "You're asking because you want to know what I am now," he said. "The Quidditch pitch gave you the answer to part of it. You're wondering about the rest." Dumbledore didn't deny it. That, Harry noted, was a point in his favor. "What did you see, from the staff stands?" Harry asked. "Focused energy," Dumbledore said. "Non-wand. Non-standard origin." The quality of it was, he picked up one of the instruments on his desk, an absent gesture, set it down, reminiscent of something very old. "Pre-wand. Pre-standard magical tradition." He looked at Harry over his spectacles. "I have encountered divine magic once before, very briefly, in my career. The signature is distinctive." "Then you already know," Harry said. "I know what they are," Dumbledore said. "I'd like to understand what that means for you." "It means I have 2 parents who love me," Harry said, "and a decade of education, and a set of capabilities that go beyond the standard curriculum. It means I'm not the boy you were planning for." The last sentence landed and sat in the room, and Dumbledore looked at it without flinching, which Harry respected. A smaller man would have deflected. "No," Dumbledore said. "You're not. What were you planning?" Harry asked. He kept his voice even because the question deserved an even voice, it was too important for heat. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair. The instruments behind him made their soft sounds. A portrait of a previous headmaster, a stout woman with an elaborate hat, was very obviously pretending to be asleep while paying close attention. "I planned," Dumbledore said slowly, "for a boy who understood sacrifice. Who had lived with limitation. Who had the courage that comes specifically from knowing what it is to have nothing." He paused. "I planned for a specific kind of hero. The kind the situation perhaps requires." And what situation is that? Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. I believe Tom Riddle is not finished, he said. Whatever survived the night your parents died, it is not gone. It is diminished, but it is persistent. And I have believed for 10 years, that the final resolution of that situation will require you specifically. Why me specifically? Harry said. The prophecy, tell me the prophecy, Harry said. Dumbledore paused. Then, with the deliberateness of a man making a real decision rather than a performed one, he told him. Every word. Harry listened without interrupting, and the words settled into him and he turned them over and felt their weight, and when Dumbledore was done, Harry was quiet for a moment. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, Harry said. Born as the 7th month dies. Neither can live while the other survives. He looked at Dumbledore. That's a description of a confrontation. Not a method. Not a sacrifice. No, Dumbledore agreed. Not specifically. You interpreted it as one, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression moved very slightly. I held it as a possibility, he said. The cupboard was part of that possibility, Harry said. The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. The portrait woman had given up pretending to sleep and was watching openly. One of the instruments on a nearby shelf emitted a sound like a small sigh. I believed, Dumbledore said carefully, that a certain kind of character was required. That it needed to be grown in specific conditions. He looked directly at Harry. I was wrong about the conditions. I do not believe I was wrong about the character. What character? Harry said. The willingness to accept a cost, Dumbledore said. Even an ultimate one. The love for the world that makes the price worth paying. Harry looked at him. You think I don't have that because I grew up loved instead of diminished. I think, Dumbledore stopped. He started again. I think I am speaking with someone who has surprised me comprehensively, and I am trying to revise my understanding honestly. He met Harry's eyes. Which is not something I do easily or often. I know, Harry said. They sat with this. The fire crackled. Outside, the October night pressed against the high windows. Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened, a different quality of attention coming forward, the strategic intelligence under the avuncular surface. I felt it on Thursday, Harry said. 2 presences in one body. The second one is dark in a way that goes beyond standard dark magic. The kind of dark that comes from structural damage to a soul. Whatever is left of Voldemort is in that room with our defense teacher every day. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You're certain? Yes, Harry said. You felt this, the divine awareness is different from one sense, Harry said. It reads differently. What's behind Quirrell's eyes isn't possession in the standard sense. It's parasitic. Using him as a host while it recovers enough to do something useful. Like obtain the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore said quietly. Harry nodded. He'd worked this out, too. 3rd floor corridor. The protections. Fluffy was the first one, I heard him through the door in September. He watched Dumbledore's face. You made it findable, didn't you? Not easy. But findable, by someone with the right capabilities. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that acknowledged more than his words did. You were waiting, Harry said. For him to try. I was managing a situation, Dumbledore said. You were using the stone as bait and the school as a trap, Harry said. He said it factually, not as an accusation, because understanding it accurately mattered more than being right about it. And when it gets to the stone, you expect it to be there. Or someone I trusted, Dumbledore said. Or a boy who'd been raised to walk into that kind of thing, Harry said. The fire crackled again. Dumbledore took a sweet from the bowl and turned it in his fingers without eating it. His face was doing something that Harry had never seen a face do quite that way, a powerful man examining his own motives in real time, finding them more complicated than he'd prefer. "I don't think you're a bad person," Harry said. "I want to be clear about that. I think you're someone who made decisions across a very long time with very high stakes and developed the habit of moving people like pieces because the alternative was worse." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "But I'm not a piece. And I need you to understand that's not a complaint or a rebellion. It's just the truth. I'll work with you. I won't be managed by you." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. Then he said, quietly, "Remarkably like your mother." "I'll take that," Harry said. He left the office and stood on the staircase as it wound back down, and he let out one long breath and then he moved. November arrived with the committed greyness of Scottish late autumn, and Harry spent its first 2 weeks with Hermione and Ron, building a picture. Hermione had the intellectual architecture for it, the research instincts, the ability to correlate information across multiple sources, the capacity for sitting in a library for 4 hours without finding this unreasonable. Ron had the intuitive pattern recognition that his chess mind produced, the ability to see the board shape before anyone had named it. Harry had everything Amaterasu and Susanoo had put in him, which was considerable, and the specific advantage of having felt Voldemort's presence with his own awareness and knowing what he was dealing with. They divided it. Hermione took the stone, its history, Nicholas Flamel, the protections they could identify from observation and inference. Ron took the political structure, what Voldemort had built, who was left from it, what Quirrell's history was before Hogwarts. Harry took the gap between what Dumbledore knew and what he was willing to act on, which was the most important gap. "He knows Quirrell is compromised," Hermione said, in the library corner they had claimed as their working space, 3 weeks into November. "He has to." "He knows," Harry said. "Then why hasn't he?" "Because he wants to see what Voldemort does with it," Harry said. "He's been waiting 10 years to understand how much of Voldemort survived. If Quirrell makes a move, it tells him everything about the current capability." Hermione pressed her mouth together. "He's using Quirrell as a diagnostic tool," she said. "And the school as the lab," Ron said, in the flat tone of someone who had arrived at a conclusion and found it unpleasant. "Which means," Harry said, "that when Quirrell moves on the stone, Dumbledore will want to be the one who handles it. He'll have planned for it." "And you want to go instead," Hermione said. "I want to go as well," Harry said. "Not instead. There's a difference." He looked at her. "If Dumbledore handles it, Voldemort is handled the way Dumbledore handles things. Managed. Contained. Set up for the next encounter on terms Dumbledore controls. And if you go," Hermione said, "it ends differently." "I don't know how it ends," Harry said honestly. "That's not the point. The point is, that thing that was in that room on Thursday is the thing that killed my parents. It has been in the school with us since September. It is using a person, Quirrell, who was probably a decent teacher before this happened to him, as a host body." He looked at both of them. "I'm not going to sit in the Gryffindor common room and wait to see how Dumbledore chooses to use that." Ron looked at him and then said, with the directness that was his particular gift, "Right. So what do we need to get through those protections?" The night came in the first week of December, not because they chose it but because Quirrell chose it, and Harry felt him make the choice from 2 floors away, the dark presence behind his eyes moving from patient to active with the particular shift of something that has been waiting long enough. It was 11 at night. Harry was awake because he rarely slept before midnight. Ron was awake because Harry was, which was Ron's general policy in crisis situations. Hermione was awake because she had been awake since 9 working through protective charm theory and had lost track of time. Harry opened the dormitory door. "Now," he said. Ron was already putting his shoes on. Hermione was in the corridor in 30 seconds with her bag, which contained things she'd prepared for this specific possibility over the last 2 weeks, because Hermione Granger prepared for things. They moved through the castle with the ease of people who had spent 3 months learning its rhythms, where the stairs shifted, where Filch's patrol route had its predictable gap, where the torchlight was thin enough to move through quickly. Harry kept his awareness extended, tracking Quirrell's position below them. The dark presence was moving with purpose now, downward, toward the third-floor corridor. "He's already past Fluffy," Harry said. "How is he past Fluffy?" Ron said. "Music," Hermione said. "I read it in the enchantment notes Hagrid filed. Fluffy sleeps when someone plays music near him." "Convenient weakness for a guard dog," Ron said. "Hagrid thought it was endearing," Hermione said, in the tone of someone who had opinions about this. The third-floor corridor was empty, the door standing slightly open, the harp inside playing itself, charmed, still going, Fluffy unconscious and massive across the trapdoor. They moved past him carefully, Harry first, and down through the trapdoor, dropping into the dark below. The Devil's Snare was the first chamber, black and twisting, the tendrils already reaching toward them in the darkness, the plant's inherent intelligence identifying warmth and responding. Hermione said, "Lumos Solum," without breaking stride, and the sunlight charm hit the Devil's Snare and it recoiled. Harry watched her do it and felt a small, sharp pride in her. She had prepared this specifically, had identified the weakness and brought the counter, had not panicked in the dark. "Nice," he said. "Obviously," she said, and they moved through. The key chamber. Hundreds of keys, winged, one of them for the locked door. Broomsticks. Ron looked at the swarm and his chess mind went to work, and Harry watched him see the pattern of how the enchanted keys moved, the false randomness of it, the real randomness of it, the one key that was older and slightly bent-winged from a previous opening. "There," Ron said, and grabbed a broom and was moving before either of them had located what he'd seen. He flew with the instinctive ease of someone who'd grown up on a broom, and the key tried to evade and he anticipated the evasion, cut left when it went right, and had it in 3 passes. He was grinning when he landed. "That," Harry said, "was excellent flying." Ron's grin widened and he unlocked the door. The chess set. Life-sized, and the question of how to proceed on the board was already forming, and Harry looked at Ron and Ron was already looking at the board, his head slightly tilted, the chess mind in full operation. His eyes moved across the pieces for 40 seconds. "I need to play as the White Knight," Ron said. "Ron," Hermione started. "The board needs to take a piece to let us through," Ron said. He said it with the flat clarity of someone who had already processed the cost and decided. "If I put myself in a takeable position and let them take me, it opens the path to the king." "There's another way," Hermione said, and Harry could hear her running alternatives. "Not a fast one," Ron said. He was still looking at the board. "We don't have time for the long game. Quirrell's ahead of us. Harry needs to get there." Harry looked at Ron. Ron met his look steadily, without bravado but without flinching. "The piece will throw you," Harry said. "I know," Ron said. "Hermione stays with you," Harry said. "Harry, I should," Hermione started. "He needs someone with him," Harry said, "and I need to go forward alone." He looked at her. "You know I'm right." She looked at him with the expression she wore when she was being honest against her preference. "I know you're right," she said. "I don't like it." "I know," he said. "Thank you." She pressed her mouth together and nodded, and that was the end of the argument. Ron made his moves. The white pieces accepted him with the grave attention of enchanted things following their function. He took his position on the board, tall on the knight square, and the game moved, and the black queen crossed the board in 3 moves, and the white knight was in her path, and the piece swung and Ron went down hard. "Go," Hermione said, already moving toward Ron, her bag open for the healing things she'd brought. "Go, Harry." He went. The troll was unconscious. Quirrell had dealt with it on the way through, which Harry noted as data about what the current host body could manage. The final chamber was fire, purple flames behind him, black flames ahead, and a table with 7 potions and a riddle written on a card in Hermione's handwriting, which made sense when he thought about it because Hermione's riddle would be genuinely hard. He read it once. Found the answer on the second pass. The smallest bottle, which was almost nothing, barely a mouthful, and it would take him through the black flames and into the final chamber. He drank it. The cold of it moved through his chest and he stepped through the black fire. The final chamber was lit by purple torches and the mirror of Ariste stood against the far wall, tall and ornate and very still. And in front of it stood Quirrell. He had his back to Harry, head tilted, looking at the mirror's surface. But the thing that was not Quirrell spoke. "I wondered when you'd arrive." It was not Quirrell's stutter. Not Quirrell's voice at all, really, though it was coming from Quirrell's mouth, it was something underneath, a voice that had the quality of something preserved past its natural end, like dried flowers that have kept their shape but lost their softness. "Harry Potter," the voice said. "The boy who lived." Though I imagine that title has expanded considerably. Quirrell turned around. The face was Quirrell's face, and it wore Quirrell's mild expression, but the eyes were wrong. They had the quality of occupied space, a vacancy behind them that wasn't emptiness but something that had cleared everything human out to make room for itself. "I've felt you before," Harry said. He was calm. Not performing calm, genuinely calm, the way Susanoo had spent years training him to be calm in the presence of immediate threat, not by suppressing the physical response but by understanding it and moving through it. "Since September. 2 floors up, in a defense classroom." "And you waited," Quirrell said, with a smile that was a performance. "Patient. I expected you to come sooner. Most children come sooner." "I wasn't ready sooner," Harry said. He was looking at the mirror, at what it was showing him, the stone in Quirrell's reflected image being pocketed, but the reflection not acting. The enchantment was reading Quirrell's desire and using it as the lock. "Come and look," said the voice through Quirrell. "Let's see what the mirror shows someone like you." "I know what it shows me," Harry said. "That's not what I came for." Quirrell's eyes went from the performance to something more direct. "Then what did you come for?" "The stone," Harry said. "And to have a conversation that isn't through Quirrell." A silence. "Then, you know what I am." "I know what you are," Harry said. "I felt you in the classroom. The kind of dark magic that comes from deliberate damage to a soul. Whatever you did to survive, you gave up something structural to do it. That's in the signature. Perceptive." The voice shifted, dropped its performance quality, went to something rawer. "The boy they thought was hidden away in Surrey, raised by muggles, traumatized and small. That was the plan, wasn't it? Dumbledore's plan." "His plan," Harry agreed. "Not what happened." "No," the voice said. "Not what happened." "What are you, Harry Potter? What did they make you?" "They didn't make me anything," Harry said. He took a step forward. "They gave me what they could give. What I am is mine." Quirrell's face moved. "Give me the stone," the voice said. "I will restore myself. I will be what I was. I offer you understanding. Power. I know what you are now, and I don't need anything you have," Harry said simply. Quirrell moved. The body lurched forward with a speed that was not natural, the possessed strength of something without regard for the host's physical limits, and hands closed on Harry's arm. What happened next was not something Harry planned. The contact was direct and immediate, and through it, the dark presence behind Quirrell's eyes reached toward Harry with the automatic reflex of something that consumed by instinct, and it hit what Harry was. Not the wand magic. Not the trained wizard capability. The thing underneath all of it, the thing Amaterasu had pressed 2 fingers to his chest and pointed at years ago. The sun fire. Not the focused precision of the bludger stop, not the controlled output of a classroom exercise, the actual nature of it, the quality of genuine solar energy that had been living in him since he was 6 years old, meeting something that was built entirely from negation and damage and the deliberate destruction of light. The scream that came from Quirrell's mouth was from the thing inside him, not from Quirrell. Quirrell himself made no sound. Harry understood, with a terrible clarity, that Quirrell was barely present anymore, had perhaps not been fully present for a long time. Harry held on. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, the dark presence pushed back with everything it had, and what it had was considerable, even diminished, the weight of years and terrible purpose, but because letting go meant letting it recover and reach the stone, and the stone behind him in the mirror's enchantment was not going to be given to this. The light that came off Harry in this moment was not the controlled, targeted sunfire. It was bigger than that. It was the involuntary expression of what he was, the same kind of ambient radiance that Amaterasu produced without thinking, the solar quality of a living fragment of divine sun, and it filled the chamber with the warm gold of noon, and the dark presence screamed and screamed, and the screams had the quality of something dissolving, not breaking but losing coherence, the specific dissolution of a soul piece meeting something it was never designed to encounter. Quirrell's body went still. The hands on Harry's arm loosened. The dark presence, what remained of it, tore itself from Quirrell with a wrench that Harry felt through the contact like a cold hook pulling through the air beside his face, and it fled, and Harry knew immediately that fled was not the same as gone, that diminished was not dead, that this was not the end but a chapter break. The prophecy was not finished. He let go of Quirrell's arms and the man folded to the ground, and Harry crouched beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his throat, a pulse, thin but present, and looked at the man's face, which without the presence behind it was simply a face, tired and hollow and too young to look this old. "I'm sorry," Harry said, to the unconscious man, and meant it in the precise way that honorable things are meant, not as guilt but as acknowledgement. Quirrell had been carrying something no person should carry. The mirror stood behind him, and the stone was in Harry's pocket. He wasn't certain how that had happened. The mirror's enchantment was specific. It gave the stone to someone who wanted to find it but not use it, and apparently wanting to keep it away from Voldemort qualified. He'd felt the stone's weight appear in his pocket when the contact with Quirrell began, the enchantment making its assessment while Harry was occupied with other things. He straightened and looked at the chamber. The purple torches were still burning. The mirror of Eriste showed him, in its surface, standing exactly where he was standing, which wasn't very interesting, and behind his reflection, very faintly, 2 figures that the mirror was probably picking up from somewhere deep in what he wanted, tall, bright, warm. He looked at them for a moment. "I know," he said, quietly. Then he walked back through the black flames. Hermione was in the potion chamber, waiting. She had understood from the sound, or the silence, or the particular quality of the air, that something significant had concluded, and she was standing with her hands folded around her wand and her expression doing the thing it did when she was managing considerable emotion through considerable willpower. "Is it done?" she said. "For now," he said. "Ron is okay," she said. "Concussion, bruised ribs. He'll be furious that he missed it." "He didn't miss it," Harry said. "He made it possible." She looked at him properly then, the chamber, the state of him, the quality of the light that hadn't quite finished receding from his skin. Her expression made several adjustments in quick succession. "The stone?" she said. He touched his pocket. She looked at his face. "Voldemort?" "Gone," he said. "Not destroyed. Not yet. But gone from here." She was quiet for a moment, with the honest quiet of someone processing real information. "What happened in there?" He told her, walking back through the chambers, through the chessboard, where Ron was sitting up against the wall with a cut on his head and the expression of someone experiencing a very specific combination of pain and indignation, through the key chamber, through the devil's snare passage, up through the trapdoor and past the still sleeping Fluffy and into the corridor. He told them both. Everything. The contact, the sunfire, what the presence had felt like and what it had done and the way it had fled. Ron listened with the focused attention he brought to things that mattered, and Hermione listened with her eyes slightly unfocused in the way they went when she was recording rather than processing. When he was done, they were in the hospital wing corridor, Ron with his arm around Hermione's shoulders and Harry walking beside them, and the castle was quiet around them in the 3 a.m. quiet of a place full of sleeping people. "It's not over," Ron said. "Not a question." "No," Harry said. "He'll come back." "He'll try," Harry said. Which was a different thing, and both of them heard it, and neither of them felt the need to comment on the difference because the difference was self-evident. Madame Pomfrey found them at the hospital wing entrance and made the sound she made when students arrived injured at 3 in the morning and took Ron in with the resigned expertise of someone who'd done this many times. She looked at Harry for a long moment, checking, assessing, reading whatever she could read. "You're not hurt," she said. "I'm fine," he said. "The other one, Quirrell, 3rd floor," Harry said. "Final chamber. He needs help." She held his gaze for a moment. "I'll send word," she said. "Then, go to bed, Mr. Potter." He nodded. Hermione touched his arm briefly, not a hug, not a speech, just the solid and genuine confirmation of a hand on an arm in a corridor at 3 in the morning, which was the right gesture for the right moment. He walked back through the castle alone. He was not processing the way people in stories process things, with dramatic pauses and swelling emotion and the weight of significance landing in slow motion. He was simply walking, tired in the real physical way of someone who had used a great deal of energy, thinking about the stone in his pocket, and Quirrell's face without the thing behind it, and the prophecy as Dumbledore had told it, and the particular cold feeling of the dark presence's dissolution, which had not been satisfying so much as necessary. He stopped at a window on the 4th floor and looked out at the grounds. The lake was black and still. The forbidden forest was the dark shape of itself at the edge of the lawn. He reached into his pocket and took out the stone. It sat in his palm, small and red and warm, and he looked at it. He closed his fingers around it. Something would need to be done about it. Dumbledore would have thoughts. Harry had his own thoughts, which were different. Tomorrow those two sets of thoughts would need to meet. He looked at the sky. East was beginning, barely, not light yet, but the absence of the deepest dark, the preliminary quality of a sky that had decided it would eventually be morning. Somewhere very far to the east, past the Scottish dark and the North Sea and the continent and the long reaches of Asia, on a peninsula on the Pacific shore, the sun had already been up for hours, and the morning had already moved through its routine. And two ancient beings who had sent a child into a world that had previously misplaced him were going about whatever ancient beings go about when their child is at school and not immediately available to worry about. He would write to them in the morning. Not about what had happened, they would likely already know, or sense it, the way they sensed most things about him. Just to write. The way you write when you want someone to know you're thinking of them. He put the stone back in his pocket and walked on through the castle, and the torches moved in the passage of his going, and the magic in the walls was warm and old and present, and Hogwarts felt, around him, the way he'd felt it from the lake at the beginning of the year, vast, and human, and full of the accumulated experience of thousands of people learning how to be extraordinary in a world that required it. He'd learn some things tonight. Voldemort was real and present and not finished and had felt, on contact, like something Harry could face. Not easily. Not without cost. But face. Quirrell had been a man before he'd been a host, and that mattered. Ron had sat on a chess board for him without hesitation. Hermione had touched his arm in a corridor at 3 in the morning and said nothing, and it had been exactly right. Dumbledore was complicated and not simple and needed watching without being made into an enemy, because the situation was too important for simple narratives about who was good and who wasn't. And the prophecy said neither can live while the other survives, which meant this was not finished, and the not finishedness of it lived in Harry's chest alongside the sunfire and the lightning feeling and the warmth of who had given him both, and he was not afraid of it. He had learned, from the cliff's edge at age 4, that falling was information. He knew what falling felt like now. He walked back through the castle in the earliest dark of a December morning, and behind him, down on the 3rd floor, in a room lit by purple torches, the mirror of Eriste stood and showed the empty room its own reflection, and somewhere between here and wherever he'd fled to, a diminished wraith moved through the dark, and it carried with it the specific knowledge that the boy it had met in the final chamber was not what anyone had told it to expect. That knowledge was good, Harry thought. Better that it knew. Chapter 6, The Weight of a Name 3 Days in the Hospital Wing. Not because Harry needed it, Madame Pomfrey had confirmed this with the specific frustration of a healer whose patient was demonstrably fine when the situation called for at least a minor ailment. Ron needed it. Ron had a concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and the expression of someone who had been told to stay horizontal for 72 hours and found this morally objectionable. Harry spent most of those 3 days in the chair beside Ron's bed, which Madame Pomfrey had stopped trying to remove him from after the second attempt produced no result. "You don't have to stay," Ron said, on the first morning. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not going anywhere." "Neither am I." Ron looked at him for a moment. "You're annoyingly difficult to argue with." "I've been told," Harry said. Hermione brought books and also food, which was the more useful of the 2 offerings, and she sat on the other side of Ron's bed and they talked through everything, the full accounting, all 3 of them, the kind of conversation that only happens after something significant has been survived together. Harry told them about the chamber in complete detail, the things he'd edited the first night. Ron asked questions with the practical directness that was his gift. Hermione asked the analytical ones, building the framework of it, making sure she understood the mechanisms. "The Horcrux," she said, on the second afternoon. She'd been reading since the previous evening and had arrived at a conclusion that sat heavily in the air between them. "What Voldemort did to survive. That's what it is. The theoretical literature is, very dark. Very old. It requires murder as the act of fracture." "He did more than one," Harry said. He'd been thinking about it since the chamber. The feeling of the presence, not whole, not even the shape of something that had once been whole. Something that knew it was a fragment. What I felt wasn't the full thing. It was a piece of something that used to be larger. Hermione went quiet with this, which meant she'd already suspected it and was confirming the suspicion. "How many?" Ron said. "I don't know," Harry said. "More than one. The specific number," he paused, "is something Dumbledore probably has theories about." "And he'll tell you?" Ron said. He wasn't being cynical, just accurate, which was different. "He'll tell me some of it," Harry said. "The part he wants me to know." "And the rest?" Harry looked at the window, at the grey December sky above the grounds. "I'll work out the rest." Dumbledore came on the 3rd day. He came in the morning, before the other students were up, in the particular deliberate way of a man choosing a time carefully. He brought sweets, lemon drops for Ron, a different variety for Madame Pomfrey that she received with the expression of someone maintaining professional neutrality toward a gesture she didn't dislike. He sat in the chair on Ron's other side, which meant Harry and Dumbledore were on opposite sides of the bed, with Ron between them, which was a geometry that said something about the situation if you were paying attention. "Ronald," Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone who had known the Weasley family for 30 years. "How are you feeling?" "Ribs are better," Ron said. "Head's fine." "The chess board tells me it was rather spectacular play," Dumbledore said. "Sacrificing the knight. Inspired." Ron's ears went pink. "It was the fastest way through." "The fastest ways usually are," Dumbledore said. He looked at Ron for a moment with the genuine affection that was the part of him that was uncomplicated, the part that liked people and felt their losses, and then he looked at Harry. The conversation that needed to happen couldn't happen in the hospital wing, and they both knew it. "When you're ready," Dumbledore said to Harry, "my office." "This afternoon," Harry said. Dumbledore nodded. He stood. He looked at both of them, Ron and Harry, with the expression that Harry was still cataloguing, the layered one, and then he said to Ron, 50 points to Gryffindor for exceptional courage and strategic thinking, and to Harry, simply, this afternoon, and he left. Ron looked at Harry. "Is he good or bad?" Ron said. "Give me a straight answer, you never give me a straight answer on this." "Both," Harry said. "Mostly good. The bad parts are in how he makes decisions, not in what he wants." Ron absorbed this. "That's almost a straight answer," he said. "Closest I've got," Harry said. He was on the stairs outside the hospital wing when Hermione appeared around the corner with her bag and the expression of someone who had been awake for most of the night. "Horcruxes," she said, without preamble. "I know," Harry said. "I counted," she said. "Based on the theoretical framework and what we know about the First War and the events of the night your parents died, I have a number." Harry looked at her. "7, he said. She stared at him. "How, the feeling in the chamber," he said. What remained of him felt like a seventh of something. The proportions were, that's how the divine awareness works. It reads the weight of things. She was quiet for a moment, organizing the enormous fact of this into its proper place in her understanding. 6 Horcruxes plus the body he intended to return to, she said. He tore his soul into 7 pieces. Yes. Harry. She stopped walking. That means, even what happened in the chamber, wasn't enough, he said. I know. He looked at her steadily. I've known since the chamber. The prophecy is still in play. The work is still ahead. She looked at him with the particular expression she reserved for him specifically, the one that was more complicated than admiration and more grounded than worry, the expression of someone who understood the full weight of something and was deciding how to carry a share of it. Then we prepare, she said. Yes, he said. All 3 of us, she said. He smiled, not wide, not performed, the real one. All 3 of us, he said. The afternoon came grey and cold, and Harry walked through the castle feeling the year in the walls around him, the first year, the first semester, this institution that he'd been heading towards since before he could remember. It felt different now than it had in September. Not smaller, if anything it felt larger, the sense of its depth more present. He understood it differently. He understood what was hidden in it, what was being managed within it, what it protected and what it couldn't protect against. He said the password to the gargoyle and rode the staircase up and knocked. Come in. Dumbledore was at his desk but not behind it. He'd moved his chair around to the side, which was an architectural choice about the dynamic of the conversation, a gesture toward equality that Harry noted and appreciated without fully trusting. He sat in the offered chair and they faced each other with 2 feet of space and no desk between them. The stone, Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his pocket and set it on the table between them. It sat there, red and warm, and Dumbledore looked at it with an expression that was more complicated than relief. Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. He needs to know it's safe. The decision about what to do with it should involve him. I agree, Dumbledore said, which Harry had expected, and then, I've already contacted him, which he hadn't. He and his wife had accepted a certain eventuality. They have some time yet. The stone's destruction is their choice. Harry nodded. The stone stayed on the table between them. Voldemort survived the chamber, Harry said. I know, Dumbledore said. I felt it, the departure. Something fled. He was quiet for a moment. He was diminished further. Losing the connection to Quirrell will have cost him. But not finished, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. Not finished. He looked at Harry. I need to tell you something that I should have told you before. I was managing the information, which you have already correctly identified as a habit I need to examine. Harry waited. The night your parents died, Dumbledore said, a prophecy was made. Part of it I told you. The full context, the reason Voldemort chose you, specifically, of the children who fit the criteria, was a choice he made. The prophecy named 2 possible children. He chose you. And in choosing you, he marked you. He looked at the scar on Harry's forehead. In marking you, he transferred something of himself. A piece of his soul, Harry said. The silence that followed was the most complete silence the room had produced. Even the instrument stopped. Dumbledore stared at him. I've been thinking about it since the chamber, Harry said. The scar. The way it behaved when Quirrell was near me. The connection I felt, not just to the presence in Quirrell, but something deeper, something that felt like it was in me rather than outside me. And the feeling of the presence in the chamber, partial. Fractional. 7 parts. He looked at Dumbledore. The 7th piece. Where do you keep something you don't know you're keeping? Dumbledore had gone very still. How long have you, since the chamber, Harry said. I'm certain since the chamber. I suspected before. You should have been. Dumbledore stopped himself. He started again. That is a significant burden to carry alone. I carried it for 3 days, Harry said. Not decades. He said it without accusation. Just accuracy. What I need to know is whether you've known. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, I have suspected. Since you were very young. The specific nature of the transfer, whether it constitutes a Horcrux in the traditional sense, I have been uncertain. Your uncertainty produced a plan, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at the window. A plan that required me to walk into something I couldn't survive, Harry said. To sacrifice the piece of Voldemort's soul in my scar. That was the prophecy's resolution in your model. That's what neither can live while the other survives means in your reading of it. The fire was very loud in the silence of the office. I believed, Dumbledore said carefully, that a certain kind of love, the willing sacrifice, would be sufficient. That if you chose it, understanding the cost, the piece in you would be destroyed and you would survive as your mother survived. I believed it was possible. You believed it was possible, Harry said. Not certain. No, Dumbledore said quietly. Not certain. Harry looked at him, the full weight of his attention, the thing that made people feel, when it landed on them, that they were being read rather than looked at. Dumbledore received it without flinching. I'm not going to pretend this is simple, Harry said. What you've been planning, across my whole life, without my knowledge, toward an outcome that might have killed me. That's not a small thing. No, Dumbledore said. But I also understand, Harry said, that you were dealing with a situation that was genuinely terrible, with limited information and unlimited stakes, and you made the decisions you could make with what you had. He paused. I just need you to understand that those decisions are over. The model you were working from, me as a piece, a weapon, something to be positioned, that ends here. We work together now, or we work separately, but I'm not managed. Understood, Dumbledore said. He said it simply, the word he used when he meant it without decoration. Harry nodded. He picked up the stone and held it for a moment, and then he set it down again and looked at Dumbledore. The other Horcruxes, he said. You have theories. I do, Dumbledore said. Tell me, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. And then he began to talk, really talk, not the managed disclosure of a man distributing information strategically, but the full account, everything he'd assembled over 40 years of studying Tom Riddle, the objects, the locations, the logic of a boy who had wanted to be immortal and had achieved something that was technically immortality and practically horror. He talked for an hour. Harry listened with complete attention, asking 3 questions that cut to the structural issues Dumbledore had been circling, and Dumbledore answered them honestly, which Harry verified not by any divine sense but by the internal consistency of the information, the way it fit with what he already knew. They were not friends at the end of it. They were something more complicated and more useful, 2 people with different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of power who had agreed, explicitly, to work toward the same outcome on terms they'd both accepted. Harry had no illusions about Dumbledore's habits, about the 40 years of strategic management that had built his decision-making architecture. But illusions had never been particularly useful anyway. He left the office as the winter evening was settling over the castle grounds. The sky was the dark blue of 4 o'clock in December, clear and very cold, the stars beginning to appear above the eastern tree-line. He stopped at the same window he'd stopped at the night of the chamber. The grounds were empty except for Hagrid moving toward the forest with something over his shoulder. The lake was still. He wrote the letter on a piece of parchment he had in his jacket pocket, leaning against the windowsill. Not long. He wasn't the kind of person who wrote long letters when short ones would do. He wrote about the year in the way that covered what had happened without being a report, and he wrote at the end, simply, "I'm well. I know what's ahead. Come at the end of term. I want you to see it." He folded the parchment and sent it with one of the school owls from the Ollery, watching it go east into the darkening sky until it was a dot and then not even that. The end of term came. The school emptied in the way schools empty for Christmas, gradually, loudly, then suddenly completely, the corridors going quiet with the specific silence of an institution resting. Ron went home to the burrow with an invitation extended to Harry that Harry had accepted and was looking forward to with genuine warmth. Hermione went home to her parents and extracted a promise of letters that Harry intended to keep. The morning they were due, the morning of the 23rd of December, which Harry had given them as the date, he was in the entrance hall when the doors opened. Not with the drama of a storm arriving, which was Susanoo's usual energy signature, and not with the warm ambient radiance that announced Amaterasu at her most herself. They had contained it, both of them, down to something that read as simply two very tall people walking through the front doors of a school, which was the consideration of people who had thought about what arriving at a school full of magic would mean and had made adjustments accordingly. But the castle knew. The magic in the walls responded the way it responded to very old things, not with alarm, not with hostility, but with a kind of deep recognition, the way very old trees respond to weather they have felt before. The torches in the entrance hall brightened. The stone floor seemed to breathe. 3 portraits near the door woke up simultaneously and looked at the doorway with expressions of startled reverence. Harry was down the stairs in 6 steps. Susanoo caught him with both arms, the embrace of someone who had been holding this specific reunion in reserve for 4 months, and Harry was lifted off the ground in a specific undignified fashion that had characterized every homecoming since he was 6 years old, and he laughed, the full unguarded laugh that he kept for this, the one that had nothing in it except the fact of being exactly where he was supposed to be. "Put me down," Harry said. "I will when I'm finished," Susanoo said. "You always say that. It's always true." He was set down. Amaterasu was looking at him with the noon in August expression, steady and warm and complete, and she took his face in both hands for a moment the way she'd done since he was small, the specific gesture of someone checking that a person is real and present in themselves, and he looked back at her and let her see whatever she needed to see. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. "You look tired," Susanoo said. "I'm fine," Harry said. "You look fine and tired," Susanoo said. "Both are true." "A lot happened," Harry said. "We know," Amaterasu said. "You felt it?" Harry said. He hadn't been certain how much of the specific events they'd received from the distance. "The night of the chamber," Susanoo said. "The storm woke me." He said it simply. Not the storm over Japan. Harry understood he meant the internal one, the thing that responded to Harry's state the way weather responds to atmospheric pressure. "I knew you were in something serious." "I handled it," Harry said. "I know you handled it," Susanoo said, and the way he said it carried everything, the pride and the retroactive worry and the particular emotion of a parent who has trained a child to be capable and then has to watch the capability get used and feel both outcomes of that simultaneously. "Come and see the castle," Harry said. He took them through it. Not all of it, there wasn't time for all of it, but the parts that mattered. The great hall, which was decorated for Christmas and whose enchanted ceiling showed clear winter sky, and where Amaterasu stood in the middle of the floor and looked up at the ceiling with the expression of someone assessing another person's version of their own nature and finding it, if not accurate, at least affectionate in its attempt. "The ceiling is charmed," Harry said. "I noticed," she said. "What do you think?" "It has warmth," she said, which was a considerable compliment from her. The library, which Susanoo found bewildering in the specific way of someone who had been the subject of many of the books present and did not always recognize himself in them. He pulled one mythology text off a shelf and opened it, and his expression moved through several stages ending at the particular combination of exasperation and resignation that the books about him reliably produced. "She got the exile wrong again," he said. Bathilda Bagshot, Harry said. You already knew about her. I thought this was a different one, Susanoo said, reading. It's the same errors. They're all copying each other. He put it back with the careful restraint of someone choosing not to say everything he was thinking. You could write your own version, Harry suggested. I've considered it, Susanoo said. The Quidditch pitch, which Harry showed them from the top of the stands, explaining the game with the particular pleasure of explaining something you've come to understand and appreciate to people who have no prior framework. Susanoo listened and asked 3 questions, 2 of which were tactically excellent and one of which was about whether you could use lightning to accelerate the quaffle, which Harry said was not within the rules. The rules seem limiting, Susanoo said. All rules are limiting, Harry said. That's the point of rules. The rules your headmaster works from seem particularly limiting, Susanoo said. He said it without heat, an observation, not a complaint. He had been updated by letter, Harry had made sure of it, and had processed what Dumbledore was with the equanimity of an 800,000-year-old entity who had encountered many varieties of powerful human with complicated intentions. I talked to him, Harry said. We have an understanding. Susanoo looked at him. What kind of understanding? The kind where I'm not managed, Harry said. And he accepted that. He had limited alternatives, Harry said, with the calm of someone who had thought this through. Susanoo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good, and the word carried the specific weight of approval from someone whose approval had always meant something precise. They were in the library again in the afternoon. The school was empty enough that the library had the quality of a room that was resting, the books quiet on their shelves, the winter light coming in grey and even through the tall windows, when Amaterasu said, without looking up from the text she was reading, the Horcrux. Harry looked at her. In the scar, she said. He had been waiting for this. He had known she would feel it, she had put her hands on his face and looked at him in the entrance hall and she had felt everything that was in him, she always did. He had known that the thing in his scar would not escape her attention. Yes, he said. She set down the text. Susanoo, who had been at the window, turned around with an expression that had gone to complete stillness. How long have you known? She said. Since the chamber, Harry said. 3 weeks. You didn't write it, Susanoo said. No, Harry said. I wanted to tell you in person. Susanoo crossed the room and sat down on the floor, as always, in front of Harry's chair, and he looked up at Harry with an expression that Harry had seen a handful of times in 11 years, the expression that lived underneath everything else, the one that was purely feeling without any management on it. Tell us what you know, Amaterasu said. Harry told them. Thoroughly, precisely, the way he'd been taught to tell things, all of it, the chamber, Dumbledore, the theory of the Horcruxes, the prophecy's full text and his interpretation of it, the likely path ahead, the other pieces and where Dumbledore suspected they might be. He spoke for 20 minutes. Neither of them interrupted. When he finished, the library was very quiet. Susanoo looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at Harry with the expression of someone doing something difficult on purpose. The plan this Dumbledore had, he said. That you would die to remove it. Had, Harry said. Past tense. That model is gone. There may be a point, Amaterasu said carefully, where it becomes the question again. The piece of soul in the scar, it cannot remain. It needs to be destroyed for the final confrontation to resolve. I know, Harry said. And the method of destroying it, I know, Harry said again. He looked at her steadily, the green eyes clear. I'm not afraid of it. I want you to understand that, not because I'm being brave or because I'm performing something for you. I genuinely understand what might be required and I'm not afraid of it. You gave me that. Both of you. The silence that followed was the most complete thing in the room. Amaterasu's expression moved with the slowness of something tectonic, deep, irreversible, the specific movement of a face that is allowing itself to feel something it has been holding with great care. You're 11 years old, Susanoo said. His voice was even. I know how old I am, Harry said. 11, Susanoo said. The situation doesn't wait for a better age, Harry said. Not harshly, gently, because this was the most important person in his life and the information was hard. I'm not going to do anything reckless. I'm not going to go looking for it. I'm going to be here, at school, learning things, with Ron and Hermione, doing what 11-year-olds do at school, which is apparently also sometimes stopping dark wizards, but mostly other things. Susanoo looked at him for a long moment. And you'll come home in summer, Susanoo said. Every summer, Harry said. I promise. Susanoo looked away, at the window, at the grey December sky. His jaw was set with the specific set of it that appeared when he was feeling something large and managing it through the discipline of a being who had been managing enormous things for a very long time. The window glass trembled, very slightly, for exactly 3 seconds. Every summer, Susanoo said. Yes, Harry said. And if something tries to stop you, then something will find out what I am, Harry said, with the calm certainty of a statement of fact. Susanoo looked back at him. Whatever had been needing to be said between them in this conversation had been said, and it sat in the room fully formed and complete, and Susanoo reached out and gripped Harry's shoulder once, briefly, solidly, the gesture carrying everything it carried, and nodded. Amaterasu had been looking at the window. She looked back at Harry and said, "Show me what you've learned this year." The wand magic. I want to see how it fits with everything else. Right now? Harry said. Why not right now, she said. They went to the empty transfiguration classroom, which had space and no breakable objects in immediate range. Harry walked them through it, the charms he'd developed beyond the standard curriculum, the transfiguration work, the potions understanding. He showed them the combination he'd been working on privately, the thing he hadn't mentioned to anyone because he hadn't finished it yet, the way the wand magic and the divine energy could work in the same moment without interfering, 2 different magical principles running in parallel like 2 rivers that shared a valley without mixing. He demonstrated it on a piece of transfigured stone from the floor. The wand magic reshaped it and the sunfire sealed the reshaped form, and the result was something that looked like ordinary stone but was, he had discovered, effectively indestructible. He held it out. Amaterasu took it and turned it in her fingers. She pressed on it with a force that should have crumbled stone, and it didn't. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't surprise. She was rarely surprised, but was the particular focused attention of someone who has seen something genuinely new. How long? She said. 2 months, he said. I've been working on the interaction since October. It's elegant, she said. Which was the highest technical compliment she gave. I have ideas for more applications, he said. I need the 2nd year to develop them properly. Susanoo was holding the stone now, examining it with the expression of someone making an assessment from a different angle. Combat application, he said. Several, Harry said. Show me one, Susanoo said. Harry showed him 3. After the second one, Susanoo put the stone down and crossed his arms and looked at Harry with the unguarded expression, the real one, no management on it, and said, I'm proud of you, and the words were simple and enormous, and Harry received them the way he always received them, not with deflection, not with performed humility, but with the direct honesty of someone who had been taught that love given plainly deserved to be accepted plainly. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, Susanoo said. You did it. You gave me the foundation, Harry said. The foundation is the least part, Susanoo said. What you built on it is yours. They stayed that night in the castle. Dumbledore had extended the invitation with the careful diplomatic warmth of a man who understood that the 2 people currently in his school were well beyond his ability to manage and had decided that hospitality was the appropriate response to this situation. He had dinner sent to the library, which was where they'd ended up again, the 3 of them around a table of books with food between them, and it was, Harry thought, the most himself he'd felt since September. Susanoo had opinions about the food, which were characteristically direct. This is good, he said, about the roast potatoes. The rest is adequate. The house elves have been cooking this food for, Harry started. The potatoes are good, Susanoo said. I'm complimenting the potatoes. He's very complimentary about potatoes specifically, Harry said to Amaterasu. He always has been, she said. The potato, Susanoo said, is an honest vegetable. It does exactly what it says it will do. Harry looked at Amaterasu. She looked back at him with the expression that said, I have been living with this for longer than you have been alive. After dinner, Amaterasu read and Susanoo sat with his back against a bookshelf and closed his eyes in the specific way of someone who was not sleeping but was very present to the room around them, and Harry sat at the table and looked at the two of them and thought about the year, all of it, the full accounting, and felt the weight of what was ahead settle into something that was not dread and not naivety but something between them. He had 6 more Horcruxes to find, after the year's count. He had a prophecy that was still in play. He had a diminished dark wizard who had just encountered him and revised his understanding of what Harry was, and would be using that information. He had a headmaster who was working with him now but whose instinct toward management would require continued watching. He had years of this school ahead of him, and the friends he'd found in it, and the things he was learning in it that were genuinely interesting and genuinely worth learning. And he had this. 2 people with their backs against bookshelves in a library in December, present and unhurried, who had come when he said come and who would leave when he needed them to leave and who had given him everything that mattered. He picked up his quill and opened his notebook, the one with the divine script and the English notes and the wand magic theory and the Horcrux diagram he'd been building, and he wrote at the top of a fresh page, in the handwriting Amaterasu had taught him, careful and clean, Year 2. What I know. What I need to know. What comes next? He looked at the 3 headings. Then he wrote, underneath the 3rd one, in the plain English of someone being honest with himself, everything. But that's fine. I've fallen from bigger heights than this. He paused. Added, and the sun was right there. Susanoo opened one eye. You're writing about us, he said. Notes, Harry said. You're writing about the sun comment, Susanoo said. I can feel the sentiment from here. Close your eye, Harry said. I will when I'm finished, Harry said. I know. Susanoo smiled. It was the real one, the booming laugh ancestor, the smile that lived under the storm and the divinity and the 800,000 years, just a person, in a library, in December, with someone he loved and who was fine, who was going to be fine, who had the sun fire in his chest and the lightning in his hands and the full weight of 2 ancient beings behind him and a world ahead of him that had absolutely no idea what was coming. The torches in the library were warm. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning, touching the dark grounds of Hogwarts with the quiet industry of snow that meant to stay, settling on the lake and the forest and the pitch and all the old stone of a place that had stood for 800 years and intended to stand for 800 more. Harry Potter, who had been found in a cupboard and raised on cliffs and storms and sunlight, who had walked into this world at 11 years old and had not diminished himself for a single moment of it, turned a fresh page in his notebook and wrote until midnight, planning the next year with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had no intention of being anything other than exactly what he was. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, the torches burned. And somewhere over the Pacific, too far to see but close enough to feel, something warm and immense and entirely patient waited for summer.